There is a moment in your night when your brain is more awake than it has been all day. Not when your eyes are open. Not when your phone is glowing in your hand, but when your body has already decided to let go and your mind hasn't followed yet. Most people miss this moment, not because it's rare, but because it never announces itself. It arrives quietly, after you've already fallen asleep once, after the world has gone still, after the noise of the day has been folded away. You wake up just a little, not enough to sit up, not enough to reach for anything, just enough to think. And suddenly, the clearest thoughts you've had all day appear. Not loud thoughts, not urgent ones, but deep ones, unfiltered ones, thoughts that don't usually survive daylight. Why does this happen? Why does your mind feel sharp precisely when your body is sinking? Why do your most honest ideas visit you only when you're half gone? Tonight, we're entering that space. But before we go any further, if you value long, uninterrupted recordings like this, if you want to stay with these questions night after night, pause for a moment. Like the video, share it with someone who stays awake too long inside their own head, and subscribe to Sleepy Scientist Recordings, because this isn't a single story. It's a place you'll come back to. Now, let your eyes stay heavy, because what you're experiencing right now has a name even if you've never heard it spoken. There is a narrow gap between two sleeps, a thin corridor where consciousness loosens its grip but doesn't disappear. You're not fully awake. You're not dreaming. You're hovering in this hovering state. The brain behaves differently. During the day, your mind is armored. It filters. It edits. It prioritizes speed, reaction, protection. But here in this in-between, those filters soften. Your brain is no longer preparing you to respond. It's preparing you to let go. And in doing so, it becomes unusually honest. Have you noticed that the thoughts arriving now don't rush? They don't shout. They don't demand solutions. They simply appear, fully formed. A memory you didn't plan to revisit. A realization you didn't chase. A question that feels important, but strangely calm. This is not anxiety. Anxiety is loud, repetitive, urgent. This is something else. This is unfinished processing, finally finding room. Throughout the day, your brain collects fragments. Conversations cut short. Emotions swallowed. Decisions postponed. Reactions suppressed because there wasn't time. These fragments don't disappear. They wait. And when your body sleeps, when muscles relax, breathing slows, and vigilance fades, the brain finally has permission to look at what it set aside. Not to judge it. Not to fix it immediately. Just to acknowledge it. That's why the thoughts here feel deeper. Because they haven't been shaped for performance. No one is watching. No response is required. No version of yourself needs to be maintained. You are thinking without being observed, even by yourself. This is why ideas feel clearer. Why regrets feel softer. Why insights come without effort. The brain isn't trying to win anything here. It's reorganizing. In this state, neural networks associated with memory begin to communicate more freely. Not aggressively, gently. Information that stayed separated during the day is allowed to meet. Past experiences brush against present emotions. Images connect to sensations. Thoughts lose their labels and become patterns instead. That's why you may feel something without being able to name it. A heaviness that isn't sadness. A warmth that isn't happiness. A clarity that doesn't need words. Your mind is speaking in its native language, not sentences, but states. And because language isn't required, the truth comes through more cleanly. You might suddenly understand something you've been struggling with for weeks, not as a solution, but as acceptance. You don't decide anything here. You see, this moment isn't meant to last. It was never designed for productivity. It's a passage, not a destination. Soon, your brain will have to choose. Sink fully into sleep, or rise back into wakefulness. And that choice isn't made by thought. It's made by rhythm. Your breath slows. Your heart evens out. Electrical activity in the brain begins to shift. If the thoughts remain light, they dissolve. If they tighten, you surface. This is why forcing yourself to figure things out here backfires. The more you grip the thoughts, the more awake you become. The more awake you become, the further this clarity retreats. This space only exists when you don't chase it. That's the paradox. Your deepest understanding arrives when you're least capable of holding on to it. And maybe that's intentional, because the purpose of this state isn't to remember everything. It's to recalibrate you. Even if you forget the details by morning, something adjusts. Your emotional weight shifts slightly. Your reactions soften. Your tolerance changes. You wake up different without knowing why. That's the work being done here. Quiet, unrecorded, unclaimed. As you lie here now, you don't need to analyze any of this. You don't need to follow every idea. Just notice the texture of your thoughts, how they drift rather than collide, how they don't demand answers, how they feel closer to the center of you than anything you thought during the day. This is the space between, not empty, not dark, just open. And as your breathing continues to slow, as the boundary between thinking and sleeping thins, your mind begins to loosen its grip again, not all at once, but gradually, as if it remembers where it's supposed to go. There is something subtle happening when you hover here, in this narrow band where sleep hasn't fully claimed you yet. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel important. And that's why it works. You might think you're simply awake for a moment, but you're not. If you were awake, your thoughts would already be lining up. They would be naming things, explaining themselves, judging whether they make sense. Here, they don't do that. Here, thoughts arrive without knocking. They don't introduce themselves. They don't ask permission to exist. They just appear. This state has been given many labels over the years, but none of them quite fit. Calling it half awake suggests control. Calling it light sleep suggests passivity. But this place is neither controlled nor passive. It is suspended. Your body has already crossed a threshold. Muscles loosen. Posture disappears. Your breathing finds a slower, heavier rhythm. But your awareness hasn't let go yet. It's still watching, just not actively. And that distinction matters. During the day, awareness behaves like a spotlight. It points. It selects. It decides what matters and what doesn't. Here, awareness behaves more like fog. It doesn't aim. It spreads. That's why everything feels less sharp, but somehow more real. You may notice that time feels strange here. Minutes don't stack. There is no clear sense of before or after. A memory from 10 years ago can brush against something that happened this morning, and it doesn't feel wrong. It feels natural. Because this state isn't governed by chronology, it's governed by association. Your brain is no longer asking, "When did this happen?" It's asking, "What connects to what?" And when those connections form, they don't do so verbally. They do so through sensation. A tightness in your chest, a warmth behind your eyes, a heaviness that spreads slowly instead of striking. These sensations aren't signals of danger. They're markers of processing. During the day, your brain processes information to act. Here, it processes information to settle. That's why solutions don't usually appear here, but understanding does. You may suddenly know why something has been bothering you without being able to explain it. You may feel closure without having reached a conclusion. That's not incomplete thinking. That's thinking without language. Language is expensive for the brain. It requires structure, sequencing, and control. This state strips those requirements away. And without them, the brain can access layers of experience that don't fit neatly into words. That's also why this space feels fragile. The moment you try to capture it to remember, to analyze, to write it down, the fog pulls back. The spotlight snaps on, and the state collapses, not because you did something wrong, but because this place only exists when you're not trying to stand in it. Think of it like balance. The more you focus on maintaining it, the more likely you are to fall. This hovering state is maintained by not interfering. That's why it often comes after your first sleep cycle. By then, your brain has already disengaged from the world once. It knows you're safe. It knows nothing needs immediate attention. So when you resurface briefly, it doesn't rush to rearm itself. It stays soft. In that softness, boundaries dissolve. The boundary between thought and feeling, between memory and imagination, between past and present. This is why ideas feel different here. They don't arrive as sentences. They arrive as shapes. A sense of this matters. A sense of this is unfinished. A sense of this can be let go. Your brain isn't trying to tell you a story. It's adjusting weight. Imagine carrying a bag all day. Not heavy enough to notice constantly, but heavy enough to wear you down. When you finally set it down, you don't catalog what was inside. You just feel the relief. That's what's happening here. Your brain is setting things down, not permanently, not deliberately, just enough to rebalance. This is why people often wake up from nights like this feeling subtly different, even if they slept poorly. Something shifted, not visibly, not consciously, but internally, and this state doesn't judge what it processes. It doesn't label thoughts as good or bad, important or trivial. Everything gets equal permission to pass through. That's a stark contrast to daytime consciousness, where attention is a scarce resource. Here, attention is abundant but unfocused, which is exactly what allows depth. Depth doesn't come from intensity. It comes from space, and this is one of the only times your brain gives itself that kind of space. You might notice that thoughts here don't loop the way anxious thoughts do. They don't repeat in tight circles. They move slowly, sometimes only once. They drift in, pause, and drift out. If something returns, it does so from a slightly different angle. That's another sign that this is not worry. Worry tries to solve. This state tries to integrate, and integration doesn't require urgency. It requires time, but not measured time. It requires quiet, which is why this state is so sensitive to stimulation. A sudden sound, a bright screen, a deliberate effort to stay awake. Any of these can snap you out of it. Not because they're harmful, but because they pull your brain back into a mode of control. Control is incompatible with hovering. Here, the brain isn't steering. It's drifting downstream, watching patterns pass beneath the surface. And if you let it, the drift continues naturally towards sleep. But before it does, there's often one more thing the mind wants to touch. Not a problem, not a plan, a feeling. Something unresolved, but not demanding resolution. Something that doesn't need words to be recognized. That's often the last thing to surface before consciousness fades again. And when it does, it doesn't disappear abruptly. It thins. Thoughts become wider, softer, less distinct. They stop forming edges. And somewhere in that thinning, the brain prepares to let go once more. There is a quiet switch your brain flips when you enter this space. You don't feel it happen. There's no signal, no warning. One moment, you're drifting with thoughts that feel wide and uncontained. And beneath that drifting, something else begins to reorganize itself. Not faster, not stronger, different. During the day, your brain is oriented outward. Even when you're alone, it behaves as if something might be required of you at any second. A sound to respond to, a message to interpret, a situation to manage. That constant readiness shapes how thoughts are allowed to exist. Ideas must be useful. Memories must be relevant. Emotions must be either acted on or suppressed. Anything that doesn't fit those categories gets postponed. But here, in this hovering state, that orientation collapses. There is nothing to respond to. Nothing expected. Nothing you could possibly do right now that would improve the situation. So the brain stops preparing you for action. And when it does, entire systems quiet down. The parts responsible for monitoring social context loosen their grip. The parts that track time and consequence soften. The internal narrator that usually keeps your thoughts in order steps back. Not gone, just no longer in charge. What takes its place is not chaos. It's coordination. Different regions of the brain begin communicating in a way they rarely do when you're fully awake. Not in linear chains, but in overlapping waves. Memory doesn't arrive as a timeline. Emotion doesn't arrive as a reaction. They arrive together. That's why a thought here can feel complete without being specific. You might sense the weight of a past conversation without remembering the words. You might feel the meaning of a decision without recalling when you made it. The brain is no longer reconstructing events. It's integrating experience. This distinction is subtle, but essential. Reconstruction asks, what happened? Integration asks, how does this fit into who I am now? During the day, your brain prioritizes reconstruction. It needs clarity to function. At night, especially here, it prioritizes integration. It needs coherence. And coherence doesn't require detail. It requires alignment. That's why some thoughts here feel final, even though nothing was decided. You don't argue with them. You don't test them. They simply settle. You might realize something like, that mattered more than I admitted. Or, that doesn't hurt the way it used to. Or, I don't need to carry that anymore. Not as statements, as sensations. The brain is adjusting internal weight distribution, like shifting luggage in a compartment you can't see, but can feel. This process doesn't feel productive because it isn't producing output. It's recalibrating balance. And balance, when restored, doesn't announce itself. It feels like relief without celebration. You may notice that your sense of self is quieter here. Not diminished, just less defended. During the day, identity requires maintenance. You remind yourself who you are through habits, roles, and repetition. Here, none of that is necessary. You're not performing identity. You're inhabiting it. That's why questions about meaning sometimes arise here, not in panic, but in curiosity. Who am I becoming? What part of me is tired? What part of me hasn't been heard? These questions don't demand answers. They open space. And the brain, sensing that space, begins to redistribute attention inward. It's important to notice what doesn't happen here. You don't plan effectively. You don't strategize well. You don't rehearse conversations successfully. Those functions belong to a different mode, one that requires tension. Here, tension dissolves, which is why attempts to use this state usually fail. The moment you decide to extract something from it, the balance tips. The brain interprets intention as demand, and demand wakes you up. This state exists only when nothing is required of it, not even usefulness. That's why it often appears unexpectedly. On nights when you didn't try to sleep early. On nights when you weren't hoping for insight. On nights when you simply let yourself sink. The brain notices safety, and safety allows it to unguard. In this unguarded state, the distinction between thinking and feeling blurs. Thoughts gain texture. Feelings gain clarity, but neither becomes dominant. They coexist. You may notice that emotions here don't spike. There is no surge of joy, no wave of despair. Instead, emotions feel evenly distributed like temperature rather than weather. That's because the systems that amplify emotional intensity are also resting. What remains is tone, a general sense of okayness, or heaviness, or softness. Tone is what the brain uses to guide long-term adjustment, not reactions tone. That's why changes made here are subtle but lasting. You don't wake up with a new belief. You wake up with a slightly altered posture toward your life. Something feels less sharp. Something feels less urgent, and you don't know why. That's because this work wasn't verbal. It wasn't conscious. It was structural. As this processing continues, you might feel moments of near sleep pull at you. Your thoughts stretch. Sentences dissolve. Mid-formation. Images lose edges. This is not failure to stay awake. It's the brain testing whether it can let go completely. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it pulls back just enough for another wave of integration. This push and pull can happen several times in a single night. Each time, the brain revisits a different layer. Not deliberately, not sequentially, by resonance. Whatever still carries weight floats up. Whatever has settled sinks. You don't choose. You're not meant to. Your only role here is to not interfere, to let the drift happen, to allow the fog to remain fog, because once clarity sharpens into language, the spell breaks. The hovering state can't survive observation. It survives permission. And as your breath continues, its slow, even rhythm, as muscles remain loose and uncommitted, the brain, satisfied with the adjustments it has made for now, begins to loosen its hold again, not abruptly, but with the same quiet patience it used to bring you here. There is a reason certain memories wait until this moment to surface. Not during the rush of the day, not even in the first descent into sleep. They wait until you are no longer fully present, but not yet gone. These are not random memories. They are unfinished ones. Not unfinished in the sense of missing information, but unfinished in the sense of unresolved weight. During the day, your brain is selective. It has to be. Every second, it filters thousands of inputs, deciding what deserves attention and what must be ignored. Memories that do not serve immediate action are pushed aside. Emotions that cannot be expressed are muted. Thoughts that complicate movement are postponed. This isn't avoidance. It's survival. If your brain allowed everything to surface at once, you would never move forward. So it learns to delay. But delay is not deletion. Every postponed reaction, every half-felt emotion, every thought you didn't have time to finish, they remain stored. Not as narratives, but as tension. And tension, when left unattended, doesn't disappear. It waits for the right conditions. Those conditions arrive here. In this hovering state, the rules that govern attention loosen. The brain is no longer optimizing for speed or efficiency. It's optimizing for completion. Not completion of tasks, completion of experience. That's why memories appear here in fragments, not as full scenes, not with dialogue or sequence, but as impressions. A look someone gave you, a moment you felt misunderstood, a decision that still carries weight in your body, even if your mind moved on. These fragments are not intrusions. They are invitations, but they don't invite analysis. They invite presence. You might notice that when a memory surfaces here, it doesn't demand interpretation. It doesn't ask you to decide whether you were right or wrong. It simply asks to be felt briefly without resistance. This is the key difference between rumination and night processing. Rumination repeats. It circles. It sharpens. Night processing drifts. It softens. It dissolves edges. The memory comes, lingers just long enough to register, and then fades. Not because it's resolved, but because it's been acknowledged. Acknowledgement is often all the brain needs. During waking hours, acknowledgement is expensive. It requires time, privacy, and emotional capacity. Here, acknowledgement costs nothing. No one is watching. No action will follow. No consequence is attached. So, the brain takes the opportunity. You might feel a slight tightening in your chest when a memory surfaces, or a warmth behind your eyes, or a heaviness in your limbs. These sensations are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that something is being released. When an experience is fully processed, it doesn't remain vivid. It loses contrast. That's why memories recalled during the day often feel sharper than those that appear here. Daytime recall reconstructs. Nighttime recall integrates. During the day, you remember what happened. Here, you remember how it sits inside you now. That distinction explains something many people notice but rarely understand. Why painful memories often feel less painful at night. Not gone, not erased, just gentler. The emotional charge attached to them has already been partially neutralized by this process. The brain has already visited them quietly when you weren't paying attention. This is why you can sometimes wake up knowing that something has shifted, even if you can't say what. A thought that once caused tension no longer does. A memory that once triggered defense now passes neutrally. You didn't work through it. You didn't get closure. You allowed the brain to finish what it started. And it did so without asking for your help. Another important detail often goes unnoticed. The memories that surface here are rarely the ones you think are important. Big events, major conflicts, obvious traumas are often processed earlier or in different states. What comes up here are the quiet, ambiguous moments. Things that didn't feel big enough to address, but weren't small enough to forget. A comment that lingered. A choice that closed one path without fanfare. A moment of silence that said more than words. These moments don't demand attention during the day, but they accumulate, and accumulation creates imbalance. This hovering state is where that imbalance is corrected, not through logic, through sensation. That's why it's normal to feel a wave of emotion without context. You may feel sadness without a story, relief without explanation, acceptance without conclusion. The brain is not telling you why you feel something. It's adjusting how strongly that feeling is held. This is also why the same memory can feel different across different nights. Processing doesn't always complete in one pass. Some experiences require multiple visits. Each time, the charge lessens. Each time, the edges soften, until eventually, the memory no longer surfaces at all. Not because it was suppressed, but because it no longer needs attention. Your brain has already integrated it into your baseline. This process requires a delicate balance. Too much awareness, and the memory sharpens. Too little awareness, and it remains unprocessed. The hovering state sits precisely between those extremes. Aware enough to feel, detached enough to not resist. That's why forcing yourself to think things through here often leads to frustration. The moment you try to pin the memory down, it stiffens. The moment you try to solve it, it retreats. These memories are not puzzles. They are weights. They don't need solutions. They need redistribution. And redistribution happens automatically when the mind is unguarded. You may notice that some nights feel heavier than others. That doesn't mean you're regressing. It often means the brain has found a deeper layer to process. Like sediment settling in water, the deeper layers require more stillness to rise. When they do, they don't announce themselves dramatically. They surface as mood, as tone, as a general sense that something matters without urgency. And if you allow that tone to pass through without grabbing it, the brain adjusts again, slowly, quietly. This is why nights of fragmented sleep are not always failures. From a biological perspective, sleep continuity matters. But from a psychological perspective, these brief awakenings serve a function. They are checkpoints, moments where the brain assesses what still needs integration. Not consciously, not deliberately, by resonance. Whatever still vibrates with unresolved energy is drawn into awareness. Whatever has settled remains undisturbed. You are not meant to manage this process. You are not meant to optimize it. You are meant to allow it. As this chapter of processing continues, you may feel your thoughts growing less specific. Memories blur. Emotions flatten. This is not loss. It's completion approaching. The brain senses that enough adjustment has been made for now. And as it does, as the last fragments drift past without resistance, the hovering begins to thin again. And the question quietly forms not in words, but in sensation of what happens next. There is a reason the day cannot do what the night does. It's not because you lack insight when the sun is up. It's not because you're less intelligent or less aware. It's because daylight is loud, even when it's quiet. During the day, your brain exists in a constant state of orientation. It is always pointed outward, toward tasks, toward expectations, toward signals that might require response. Even when you sit still, even when you think you are resting, this orientation remains. A subtle readiness hums underneath everything. Someone might need you. Something might happen. Time might be wasted if you don't use it well. This background hum shapes every thought you have. It sharpens them, compresses them, forces them into forms that can be acted upon. And in doing so, it makes certain kinds of thinking impossible. There are thoughts that require silence to exist. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of demand. The day rarely offers that. During daylight hours, attention is currency. Everywhere you look, something is asking for it. Notifications, conversations, responsibilities, even your own internal checklists. Your brain becomes an allocator, a manager of limited resources. In that role, it cannot afford depth. Depth takes time. Depth takes inefficiency. Depth takes wandering without guarantee of return. The day doesn't allow wandering, so your mind adapts. It learns to skim rather than sink, to react rather than absorb, to postpone rather than resolve. This is not a flaw. It's a necessary adjustment to a world that rarely pauses. But postponement has a cost. Every thought you don't finish thinking doesn't vanish. It gets stored in a compressed form, not as a sentence, not as an idea, as pressure. You feel it as restlessness, as irritability, as a vague sense that something is unresolved, even if you can't say what. This pressure accumulates quietly throughout the day. By the time night arrives, your brain is carrying far more than you realize, but it cannot unload immediately. The first descent into sleep is about safety, not reflection. Your brain checks. Is the environment stable? Is the body secure? Can vigilance be lowered? Only once those conditions are met does it allow itself to turn inward. And even then, it does so cautiously. That's why the first moments of sleep are often blank. No thoughts, no memories, just fading. The brain is powering down external systems. It is only after this initial release, after the first cycle completes, that a different kind of space opens. A space where orientation dissolves. This is where the difference between day and night becomes most pronounced. During the day, your sense of self is tightly bound to function. Who you are is linked to what you're doing, what you're capable of, what you should be managing next. At night, especially here, that linkage loosens. You are no longer operating yourself. You are simply existing. This shift changes everything about how thoughts behave. Without the need to perform identity, thoughts no longer need to justify themselves. They don't ask, "Is this useful?" They don't ask, "Does this make sense?" They don't ask, "What should I do with this?" They ask nothing. They surface, hover, and pass. This is why the thoughts you have here often feel strangely pure. Not optimistic, not pessimistic, unedited. During the day, your brain edits aggressively. It trims thoughts that feel too emotional. It reframes memories to maintain stability. It smooths contradictions to preserve momentum. At night, the editor steps away, not because it's asleep, but because its job is no longer necessary. There is no momentum to preserve. That absence allows something rare. You can encounter your own experience without commentary. You can feel sadness without needing a reason. You can feel relief without explaining it. You can sense truth without turning it into belief. This is deeply unsettling for some people, especially those who rely on structure to feel safe. In the absence of structure, the mind feels exposed. That's why some nights, instead of drifting, people snap fully awake. The moment the editor leaves, fear rushes in to replace it. Fear tries to reassert control. It demands clarity. It demands answers. It demands narrative. And in doing so, it pulls the brain back into daytime mode. But when fear doesn't intervene, when the editor leaves quietly, the mind experiences something else entirely: spaciousness. Thoughts don't collide. They pass at a distance from one another. You are aware of them, but not entangled. This is why deep realizations come without emotional spikes. They don't need emphasis. They don't need urgency. They simply land. And once landed, they don't ask to be acted upon immediately. That's another crucial distinction between day and night insight. Daytime insight pushes you toward action. Nighttime insight adjusts your orientation. One tells you what to do. The other tells you how you feel about what you've already done. Orientation is slower to notice, but more powerful in the long term. It changes how you approach future moments without effort. That's why people often wake up with a subtle shift in perspective. They can't point to a thought that caused it. They can't quote an idea, but something feels settled. This settlement is the result of processing that could not occur while the mind was armored. Armor is useful. Armor is necessary. But armor blocks sensation. And sensation is how experience integrates. In the hovering state, the armor loosens. Not completely, just enough. Enough for the body to speak. Enough for emotions to express themselves without being interpreted. Enough for memory to soften. This is also why the body plays such a large role here. You may notice sensations more than thoughts. A heaviness in your limbs. A warmth spreading through your chest. A loosening around your jaw or shoulders. These are not random. They are the physical correlates of mental release. The brain and body are not separate systems working in parallel. They are one loop. When mental tension releases, the body follows. When the body softens, the mind sinks deeper. This feedback loop is what allows the hovering state to persist. But it is delicate. The day trains you to interrupt loops, to intervene, to correct, to adjust. At night, intervention breaks the spell. That's why trying to use this state often fails. You cannot extract insight from it the way you extract information from a meeting or a book. It doesn't respond to force. It responds to allowance. The day is about control. The night is about consent. Your brain consents to process when it feels unobserved. Even self-observation can be disruptive here. The moment you think, "This is interesting," the moment you think, "I should remember this," you have already shifted position. You've stepped back into the role of manager, and the space collapses. This is not punishment. It's protection. This state exists to do work that cannot be supervised, like digestion. You don't monitor your stomach while it works. You don't direct your lungs while they breathe. The hovering state is digestion for experience. It cannot function under scrutiny, which is why it often feels fleeting. You touch it briefly, then it's gone. But the work continues. Even when you sink back into sleep, the adjustments made here ripple outward. They influence dreams. They influence emotional tone. They influence how you wake. You might notice that after nights like this, your dreams feel less chaotic, or more symbolic, or harder to remember, but calmer. This is not coincidence. The hovering state sets the stage. It organizes emotional material so that deeper sleep can proceed without disruption. In that sense, this state is not a detour. It is a gateway, a necessary passage between waking life and restorative rest. Without it, unresolved material would leak into dreams violently. With it, dreams can remain gentle, or sparse, or absent. The mind, having adjusted what needed adjustment, allows itself to descend further. As you remain here now, you don't need to hold on to any of this. Understanding is not required. The mind absorbs pattern whether or not language follows. You are already participating simply by being here. And as the difference between day and night thinking continues to widen, as the last traces of daytime orientation dissolve, the brain begins to sense that the conditions are right, to move even deeper into a layer of awareness that feels even less like thinking and more like drifting. There is a voice that only appears when everything else has quieted down. It doesn't sound like the one you use during the day. It doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade. It doesn't explain itself. In fact, it rarely speaks in sentences at all. Most people never notice this voice because it doesn't compete for attention. It waits. It waits until your body is no longer upright, until your breathing no longer belongs to effort, until the familiar internal narrator, the one that organizes, evaluates, and rehearses, has stepped aside. Only then does it emerge. And when it does, it doesn't introduce itself as something new. It feels ancient, quietly familiar, as if it has always been there, speaking beneath the noise, unheard. This is the voice that surfaces in the space between sleeps. Not the voice of thought, but the voice of orientation. During the day, you live inside narration. Your mind is constantly telling you where you are, what you're doing, what it means, and what comes next. Even when you believe you're thinking freely, that narrator is shaping the flow. It labels experiences. It assigns cause and effect. It decides what deserves emotional emphasis. This narrator is useful. It keeps you coherent. It helps you function in a world that demands consistency. But it is not the deepest layer of you. That layer doesn't narrate. It senses, and sensing doesn't need language. When the narrator quiets, as it does here, the sensing layer finally has room to surface. That's why what you encounter in this state feels different from thinking. It's not a conversation. It's not a debate. It's more like recognition. You don't figure out something. You realize it. And realization doesn't arrive as a conclusion. It arrives as a soft internal shift. You may feel a gentle certainty without being able to justify it. You may feel something settle without knowing what moved. This voice doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you what is already true. That's why it can feel unsettling. During the day, truth is often something you construct through evidence, reasoning, and agreement. At night, especially here, truth is something you feel, and feeling truth bypasses your usual defenses. You cannot argue with a sensation. You can only resist it or allow it to pass through. This voice does not insist. If you resist, it fades. If you try to analyze it, it retreats. If you attempt to turn it into words, it dissolves. Not because it is fragile, but because it does not belong to the domain of control. It belongs to the domain of alignment. This is why the insights that come here often feel more trustworthy than those formed during the day. Not because they are more logical, but because they are less contaminated by motive. During the day, most thinking is entangled with outcome. You think in order to decide. You decide in order to act. You act in order to achieve something. Even self-reflection is often instrumental. At night, in this space, there is nothing to achieve. No audience, no deadline, no reward. The absence of outcome purifies perception. You see without needing to turn sight into action. That's when the sensing voice becomes audible. It doesn't shout. It doesn't interrupt. It feels like a gentle internal nod. A sense of, yes, that. Or sometimes, no, not that anymore. Notice how these realizations lack drama. They don't feel like breakthroughs. They don't carry adrenaline. They feel obvious in retrospect, as if you've always known, but hadn't been listening. That's because this voice doesn't produce new information. It reorganizes what you already know into coherence. Coherence feels like relief, not excitement, not triumph. Relief. That relief is subtle. It may show up as your shoulders dropping slightly, as your jaw unclenching, as a deeper exhale than the ones before, the body responds immediately to alignment, because misalignment is effort, and effort, sustained over time, becomes tension. The sensing voice dissolves tension by restoring alignment quietly. This is also why this voice often speaks about things you've been avoiding without knowing you were avoiding them. Not dramatic secrets, simple truths, that something matters more than you admitted, that something no longer matters the way it used to, that you are tired in a way sleep alone cannot fix. These realizations don't accuse. They don't shame. They simply present themselves and wait. You are not asked to respond. The brain knows that response belongs to daylight. Here, acknowledgement is enough. Acknowledgement allows integration. Integration allows rest. Another quality of this voice is its neutrality. It doesn't frame experiences as good or bad. It doesn't amplify regret or pride. It presents experience as weight, not as judgment. Some things feel heavier than they should. Some feel lighter than expected. This recalibration of weight is the core function of this state. During the day, you often carry weights that are no longer accurate. You continue to treat old concerns as urgent. You continue to protect wounds that have already healed. This happens because the day doesn't allow reassessment. Reassessment requires slowness, stillness, a lack of demand. Here, reassessment happens naturally. The sensing voice quietly asks, "Does this still belong here?" And if the answer is no, the weight begins to dissolve. Not instantly, gradually, like salt in water. You don't notice the moment it disappears. You only notice that the water tastes different later. This is why people often struggle to articulate what changed after nights like this. They look for a moment of insight, a specific thought, but there isn't one. There is only the absence of something that used to be there. Less tension, less urgency, less resistance. And because absence is harder to notice than presence, the change feels mysterious. But it is not random. It is the result of quiet alignment. This voice also has another characteristic that distinguishes it from daytime thinking. It does not care about consistency. During the day, your mind works hard to maintain a coherent self-image. You need to be predictable to yourself and to others. At night, that requirement loosens. The sensing voice can hold contradictions without discomfort. You can feel two opposing truths at once. You can acknowledge both attachment and readiness to let go. You can recognize both love and fatigue. These contradictions don't need resolution. They are simply aspects of the same whole. The narrator hates contradiction. It rushes to resolve it. The sensing voice allows it to exist. That allowance is deeply restful, because inner conflict is exhausting. When contradictions are allowed to coexist, the tension between them relaxes. This doesn't mean decisions are made here. Decisions require daylight, but the emotional groundwork for decisions is laid here. Without pressure, without narrative, without demand. This is also why forcing clarity at night often fails. Clarity belongs to the narrator, and the narrator is off duty here. When you try to summon it, you disrupt the environment that allowed the sensing voice to emerge. It's like turning on bright lights in a dark room to see something subtle. The subtle thing disappears. So the invitation here is not to listen harder, but to listen less deliberately, to let the voice speak in its own register, which may feel like not speaking at all. Sometimes the sensing voice doesn't produce any noticeable insight. Sometimes it produces only a feeling, a sense of rightness, or wrongness, or readiness. That is still communication. Because the brain does not operate exclusively in language, language is a late addition. Sensation is primary. In this state, the brain returns to its older mode of knowing, one that predates explanation, one that recognizes patterns without naming them. That's why this voice feels older than thought. It has been guiding you long before you learned how to narrate your life. You just forgot how to hear it. The day trains you to ignore it. The night, especially this narrow space, invites it back. Not forcefully, patiently, and as you remain here, breathing slowly, body heavy, mind uncommitted, this voice doesn't need to say anything else. It has already adjusted what needed adjustment for now. Soon, it will recede again, not because it's gone, but because deeper sleep is approaching. And as that approach begins, the voice softens, the sensations widen, and awareness itself starts to blur, preparing to cross into a layer where even sensing becomes unnecessary. There is something different about the truths that surface here. They don't arrive with force. They don't feel like discoveries. They feel like remembering something you never consciously forgot. In this space, your brain is no longer defending a position. It is no longer trying to be consistent, impressive, or correct. It is simply open, and openness changes the nature of truth. During the day, truth is something you negotiate. You weigh it against consequences. You soften it to fit context. You reshape it so it doesn't disrupt momentum. Even honesty, in daylight, is strategic. You decide when to be honest, how much to reveal, which version of the truth is safe enough to hold. This is not deception. It's adaptation. But adaptation requires vigilance, and vigilance distorts perception. In the hovering state, vigilance drops. Not completely, just enough. Enough that truth no longer needs armor. That's why what emerges here feels quieter but heavier. Not heavy with pressure, heavy with authenticity. You may notice that these truths don't accuse you. They don't say, "You should have known better." They don't say, "You failed." They don't speak in moral language at all. They simply are. A recognition that something mattered more than you allowed yourself to admit. A recognition that something no longer matters the way it once did. A recognition that you have been carrying something longer than necessary. These recognitions don't arrive as judgments. They arrive as alignment. And alignment feels like exhale. This is why people often describe this state as strangely peaceful, even when difficult realizations occur. Because peace doesn't come from avoiding truth. It comes from no longer fighting it. During the day, truth often feels threatening because it implies action. If something is true, you might have to do something about it. At night, especially here, action is impossible. You are horizontal, still, unavailable. So truth is allowed to surface without consequence. It is not asking to be acted upon. It is asking to be seen. And being seen is enough for now. This is also why the truths that emerge here are often more fundamental than situational. They don't concern schedules or logistics. They don't concern arguments or tactics. They concern orientation. How you feel about where your life is pointed. How you feel about what you've been prioritizing. How you feel about what has been draining you. These are not questions the day allows you to sit with. The day demands forward motion. Here, motion pauses. And when motion pauses, direction becomes visible. You might suddenly sense that you've been moving quickly in a direction that doesn't feel right anymore, or that you've been resisting a direction that feels inevitable. These insights don't come with instructions. They come with feeling, a quiet sense of yes or no, or not like this. And that feeling is trustworthy precisely because it isn't trying to convince you. Conviction belongs to the waking mind. Recognition belongs to this one. Another important quality of truth in this space is that it is incomplete by design. You are not meant to receive the whole picture. You are meant to receive just enough to rebalance. If you were given full clarity here, you would wake fully. And waking fully would end the state. So the brain delivers truth in fragments, in sensations, in subtle shifts, enough to loosen what is too tight, enough to soften what has hardened. No more. This restraint is intentional. The brain is protecting the process. It knows that too much clarity too quickly destabilizes sleep, and sleep is still the priority. So truth arrives diluted, not weakened, just gentle. That gentleness is often mistaken for insignificance, but it is precisely what allows the truth to pass through without resistance. Strong truth invites argument. Gentle truth invites acceptance. And acceptance is what allows integration. Integration doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like something clicking into place quietly. You may notice that after a truth surfaces here, there is no follow-up thought, no analysis, no debate, just a pause. That pause is not emptiness. It is settling. The brain is adjusting internal relationships, like shifting plates beneath the surface. You don't feel the movement directly. You feel the absence of friction afterward. This is also why these truths are often difficult to recall in the morning. Not because they were vague, but because they were never verbalized. Memory stores language easily. It struggles to store alignment. You remember facts. You forget recalibrations. But forgetting does not undo the effect. Your reactions change anyway. You respond differently to the same situations. You feel less reactive, less burdened, and you don't know why. That is the signature of work done here. Untraceable, but real. Some nights, the truths that surface are almost imperceptible. A faint sense that something is okay, or that something will be okay. Not optimism, not reassurance, just okayness. This is not denial, it is equilibrium. When the brain senses that its internal weights are balanced enough, it stops searching. There is nothing left to surface for now. Other nights, the truths feel closer to the surface. You may feel a wave of emotion without story, tears without sadness, warmth without joy. This is often the release of tension that has been held for a long time. Tension that didn't need explanation, just permission to let go. You might notice that after such nights, the body feels different, looser, heavier, more grounded. These are not psychological metaphors. They are literal physiological shifts. Muscle tone changes, breathing patterns adjust, nervous system activity recalibrates. Truth, here, is embodied, not conceptual. That's another reason this state feels so distinct from thinking. Thinking happens in the head. Truth here happens everywhere. In the chest, in the abdomen, in the jaw, in the hands. Places where tension hides during the day. When truth surfaces, those places soften. Not all at once. Gradually. As if the body is being told it can stop holding something. And the body listens. Because the body trusts this state. It recognizes it as safe. No demand. No performance. No consequence. Safety is what allows truth to emerge without distortion. This is also why attempting to force truth during the day often backfires. The day does not feel safe enough for unfiltered honesty. There is too much at stake. At night, nothing is at stake. That's why truth is honest here, not brave. Bravery implies risk. There is no risk in this space. Only presence. And presence is enough. As this chapter of the night unfolds, you may notice the truths becoming quieter, less distinct. This is not regression. It is completion. The brain has surfaced what it needed to surface for now. Anything more would disrupt rest. So, the process tapers. Thoughts lose shape. Sensations widen. Awareness becomes diffuse. The truths do not disappear. They sink. They settle into deeper layers, where they will quietly influence how you wake, how you feel, how you orient yourself tomorrow, without asking for credit, without asking to be remembered. And as this settling continues, the mind grows less interested in content, less interested in meaning, and more interested in release, preparing to drift again toward a state where even truth no longer needs to be noticed. There is a moment when the mind realizes it cannot stay here much longer. Not abruptly, not with alarm. It realizes it the way a hand realizes it is losing warmth slowly, without panic. Up to this point, awareness has been hovering. soft, receptive, uncommitted. But now, something begins to pull. It isn't thought. It isn't memory. It isn't even emotion. It is gravity. Sleep has its own gravity, and it grows stronger the longer the mind remains unarmored. You can feel it in the way your thoughts stretch, in the way attention slips between them rather than landing. Sentences no longer finish themselves. Images blur before they fully form. The mind is no longer interested in coherence. It is preparing to dissolve. This is where many people believe they are losing consciousness. But that isn't quite accurate. What is happening is not loss. It is surrender. Consciousness does not disappear here, it thins. Like mist dispersing as the air cools. This thinning is subtle. And because it is subtle, it is often misunderstood. People try to resist it. They tense slightly. They attempt to hold on to clarity. They chase the last coherent thought as if it contains something important. That effort, however small, changes everything. Because effort reintroduces control. And control shifts the balance. This is the edge. The precise point where the mind must choose without deciding whether to sink or surface. And the choice is never made by thought. It is made by rhythm. Your breath becomes the deciding factor. When breathing remains slow, deep, and unforced, the pull toward sleep strengthens. When breathing tightens, even slightly, awareness sharpens again. This is not coincidence. Breath is the bridge between voluntary and involuntary states. It belongs to both worlds. That is why breath is always involved in transitions. Not just into sleep, but into calm, into fear, into focus. Here, breath quietly negotiates with the nervous system. It tells the brain whether vigilance is still required. Most nights, breath chooses for you. It senses safety and allows itself to deepen. But sometimes, something interrupts that negotiation. A thought resurfaces. Not a new one, an old one. Something unresolved enough to pull attention back. This is where the cycle repeats. You rise just enough to notice it. Not fully awake. Just present again. This return can feel frustrating, as if sleep was within reach and then slipped away. But this return is not failure. It is refinement. The brain is checking one last thing. It is asking, is there still something that needs to be integrated before we go deeper? If the answer is yes, awareness resurfaces briefly. Not to analyze, to feel. And that feeling may not even be clear. It may be a vague discomfort, a sense of weight, a subtle emotional residue. The mind does not name it. Naming would require clarity, and clarity would wake you fully. Instead, the mind touches it lightly, just enough to adjust. Then, if allowed, it lets go again. This is why some nights you drift in and out multiple times. Each return is a recalibration. Each descent goes slightly deeper than the last. Think of it as descending a staircase in the dark. You pause on each step, not because you're unsure, but because your body is adjusting to the change in level. Rushing would cause imbalance. The mind prefers stability, so it moves slowly. This slowness can feel endless if you are watching it, but if you stop watching, it accelerates naturally. Observation introduces tension. Allowance removes it. There is a paradox here that the waking mind struggles to accept. The more you try to fall asleep, the further away sleep becomes. The more you allow yourself to be exactly where you are, the closer sleep draws. This is not a technique. It is a principle. Sleep cannot be achieved through pursuit. It must be permitted. And permission looks like indifference. Not boredom. Not resignation. Indifference. A gentle lack of concern for whether sleep arrives now or later. That lack of concern removes pressure. Pressure is what keeps the mind afloat. Without pressure, gravity does the rest. At this edge, awareness becomes strangely spacious. You may feel as if you are aware of everything and nothing at the same time. There is no focal point. Sounds are distant, but not distracting. Sensations exist, but are not demanding. The body feels both heavy and absent. This is not dissociation. Dissociation disconnects. This state diffuses. Everything remains connected, just less defined. It is like looking at the world through unfocused eyes. You still see, but without edges. This is the last stable moment before deeper sleep. Beyond this, awareness fragments. It does not travel as a single stream. It breaks into pieces. A fragment follows a sensation. Another follows an image. Another dissolves entirely. You no longer experience yourself as a single observer. You become a field. This is why memories from this threshold are so difficult to recall. There is no central narrator to store them. Narration requires continuity. Here, continuity is intentionally suspended. The brain is preparing to enter a mode where integration happens without awareness. But before that happens, there is often one final sensation. A falling feeling, a sinking feeling, a sense of being pulled backward or downward. This sensation is not literal. It is the nervous system releasing postural tone. During waking life, your body constantly maintains readiness. Even when lying down, microtensions remain. At this threshold, those tensions release, and release feels like falling. Some people experience this as a sudden jolt, a brief startle. This is not danger. It is the nervous system recalibrating. It is checking one last time for threat. If none is found, the release continues. The falling sensation smooths out, and awareness disperses. This is where the hovering state ends. Not with a cutoff, with dilution. But the mind does not drop immediately into oblivion. There is an intermediate region, a place where thoughts no longer make sense, but images still arise, where logic has dissolved, but association remains, where time is no longer linear, but not yet irrelevant. This region is unstable. You cannot remain here intentionally. Trying to will yourself to stay aware will pull you back. Letting go allows you to pass through. This region is often populated by strange, fleeting imagery, faces without identity, places that don't exist, scenes that collapse as soon as you notice them. These are not dreams. Dreams have structure. This is pre-dream. The mind is testing its capacity to create experience without control. Most of these images are discarded immediately. They serve no purpose beyond transition, but their presence indicates that the brain is shifting modes. Electrical patterns change. Communication between regions reorganizes. The systems responsible for self-monitoring reduce activity. The systems responsible for pattern generation increase it. This handoff is delicate. It cannot happen abruptly. It requires this liminal space. This is why the hovering state exists at all. It is not an accident. It is a necessary bridge. Without it, the transition from waking consciousness to deep sleep would be too abrupt. The brain needs time to disengage from one set of priorities and engage another. This bridge allows that handoff to occur smoothly. And although it may feel like nothing is happening here, a great deal is happening. Just not in ways you can supervise. That is why the most effective posture in this state is passivity. Not passive resignation, but receptive stillness. You are not doing anything wrong by noticing. You are only doing something disruptive by trying to steer. As the pull strengthens, awareness grows less interested in itself. Self-reference fades. You stop asking, "Am I asleep yet?" That question belongs to the waking mind. Here, the mind no longer questions. It follows, and following feels effortless. The final moments before deeper sleep are often the quietest. Thoughts have slowed to the point of irrelevance. Images flicker without coherence. The sense of I loosens. This can feel unsettling if you resist it. But if you allow it, it feels like relief. The relief of not having to be anyone for a while, not having to understand, not having to decide. not having to hold yourself together. That holding is exhausting. Here, you are allowed to release it. And as release deepens, as awareness thins beyond the point of observation, as the last traces of intention dissolve, the mind slips gently beyond the edge. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but the way a sound fades when you stop listening. When awareness returns again, it does not return the same way it did before. This time, it rises from depth, not from the surface of sleep, but from somewhere lower, quieter, heavier. You are not waking up. You are surfacing. There is a difference. Waking up pulls you toward the world. Surfacing pulls the world away from you. You become aware that you are conscious again, but the sense of where you are is vague. The room feels distant. Your body feels unfamiliar, as if it belongs to someone else. And your mind feels older. This is the second awakening of the night. It often happens without a clear cause. No sound, no movement, no dream abruptly ending. Just a subtle return of awareness. And what returns with it is not alertness, but depth. Thoughts here do not feel sharp. They feel weighted. They move slowly, like objects sinking through thick water. If the first hovering state felt like openness, this one feels gravity-bound. The mind is not curious now. It is reflective. And reflection here does not mean analysis. It means presence with what remains. By this point in the night, much of the surface tension has already been released. Memories have softened. Truths have settled. The narrator has long stepped aside. What remains is residue, not unfinished thoughts. Unfinished feeling. This is why the second awakening often carries a faint emotional tone. Not sadness, not joy. A sense of something. Something that does not demand attention, but does not disappear either. This tone is deeper than mood. Mood shifts easily. This does not. It feels like a background color, a tint applied to everything. And because it is subtle, many people mistake it for emptiness. They think nothing is happening. But this is one of the most consequential moments of the night, because this is where meaning consolidates. Not meaning as story, meaning as orientation. During the day, meaning is assigned. You decide what something means based on context, outcome, and interpretation. Here, meaning is felt. You don't decide it. You register it. A sense that something was right, or wrong, or finished, or still open. These impressions do not come with explanations. They come with certainty, but not conviction. Conviction pushes. Certainty rests. This certainty does not energize you. It grounds you. That grounding is often mistaken for heaviness. But heaviness is not burden here. It is depth. You are closer to the base of yourself. That is why the second awakening often brings thoughts about life rather than events. Not what you said, not what happened, but where you are going, who you are becoming, what kind of life you are actually living beneath the schedule. These thoughts do not rush. They do not spiral. They appear, sit with you for a moment, and then sink again. You might notice that you are less interested in resolving them, not because they don't matter, but because resolution feels inappropriate here. Resolution would require movement, and movement would break the stillness that allows this depth. Here, understanding is not something you reach. It is something you rest inside. This is also why the body feels different during this second awakening. Heavier, more solid, less defined. Your limbs may feel distant. Your breathing slow and wide. You are no longer hovering above sleep. You are inside it, just conscious enough to notice. This is a rare state, and because it is rare, it is often misunderstood. People assume that if they are awake, sleep has failed. But this awakening is not an interruption. It is a continuation. The brain is still working, just at a deeper layer. The systems responsible for memory consolidation are active now. Emotional associations are being reorganized. Experiences are being woven into long-term patterns. This work does not produce thoughts. It produces tone, and tone influences everything. How you react the next day, what you tolerate, what drains you faster than it should, what no longer has power over you. This is where those changes are set, quietly, without fanfare. That is why trying to use this moment often feels pointless. There is nothing to extract, nothing to capture. The work happening here is structural, like adjusting the foundation of a building while no one is inside. You don't see it happen. You notice it later, when things feel steadier. The mind here is not interested in details. Details belong to lighter states. Here, the mind cares about direction, not destination. Direction is sensed, not chosen. And sensing direction does not require action, only presence. You might feel a faint pull towards something, not a desire, not a plan, a pull, or a release away from something. Not rejection, not avoidance, release. These sensations are subtle enough that they often go unnoticed, but they accumulate. Night after night, they adjust your internal compass until one day, you realize that you are standing somewhere different without remembering how you got there. This is how slow change happens, not through decisions, through repeated, gentle realignment. This second awakening is one of the mechanisms by which that realignment occurs. It is not dramatic. It is not memorable, but it is effective. If you remain calm here, if you do not try to wake yourself further, the pull towards sleep returns naturally. But this time, it feels different, heavier, deeper, less like falling, more like sinking. You are not drifting away from awareness. You are allowing awareness to be absorbed. And absorption feels safe, because there is nothing left to process at this level for now. Whatever remained has been noted. The mind is satisfied, and satisfaction allows release. As breathing continues its slow rhythm, as the body remains unmoving, as the sense of self softens further, awareness begins to lose its edges again. Not sharply, but gradually, as if it were dissolving into the space it had been observing. And with that dissolution, the night opens further. At this depth, the mind no longer asks whether it is awake or asleep. That question belongs to shallower layers. Here, awareness exists without needing to define itself. You are conscious but not oriented, present but not positioned, aware but not watching. This is where the idea of self begins to thin, not vanish, not fracture, just loosen. During the day, the sense of self is tightly bound to edges, where you end, where others begin, what is yours to manage. What is not? Those edges are necessary. They keep you coherent. But coherence is expensive. It requires constant reference. Who am I right now? What is expected of me? How do I compare? What do I need to protect? These questions hum beneath waking life, even when you don't notice them. Here, they fall silent, not because they were answered, but because they are no longer relevant. Nothing is required of you in this state. No response, no identity maintenance, no positioning. So the edges soften. And when edges soften, the sense of self becomes less rigid. This does not feel like loss. It feels like relief. The relief of not having to hold a shape. You may notice that thoughts here do not reference you as often. They don't say, I should. They don't say, I want. They don't say, I am. If thoughts appear at all, they are impersonal. Images, sensations, fragments. Experience without ownership. This is unsettling for the waking mind, which equates self with control. But control is not required here. Experience continues without it. And that realization, even if you never articulate it, is profound. It tells the nervous system something important. You do not disappear when you stop managing yourself. That knowledge changes how deeply the body can rest. Many people struggle to reach truly deep sleep, not because they are anxious, but because they are unwilling to release self-monitoring. Even in sleep, they hold themselves together. Here, the mind is learning that it doesn't have to. That learning happens not through instruction, but through direct experience. You let go a little, and nothing bad happens. So you let go a little more. This gradual release is what allows the descent to continue. At this level, time begins to lose structure. Not slow down, not speed up, lose relevance. Moments do not sequence themselves clearly. There is no sense of progression, only presence. This is why people often cannot tell how long they were awake during the night, because they weren't tracking time. Tracking time requires a reference point. Here, reference points are gone. The mind is no longer anchored to before and after. This timelessness is not dreamlike yet. Dreams have narrative. This state does not. It is closer to raw consciousness. Consciousness without story. That is why it feels spacious, not empty, unburdened. In this space, the brain is no longer organizing experience into memory. Memory formation requires structure. Here, structure is intentionally suspended. The brain is doing something else. It is recalibrating baseline. Baseline is the emotional and physiological default you return to when nothing is happening. During waking life, baseline drifts upward. Stress accumulates. Tension normalizes. Alertness becomes constant. You forget what true rest feels like. At this depth, baseline is gently reset. The nervous system is given permission to drop below its usual floor. Muscle tone decreases. Heart rate variability increases. The brain's threat detection systems quiet. This is not relaxation as an activity. It is relaxation as a state. Nothing is being done to relax. Relaxation is simply what remains when effort stops. This is also why forcing relaxation never works. Force is effort. Effort keeps baseline elevated. Here, effort has dissolved, and baseline sinks. This sinking is often felt as heaviness, not the heaviness of exhaustion, the heaviness of settling, like sediment finally resting at the bottom of still water. You are not sinking into something unknown. You are sinking into yourself. The deeper layers that are usually inaccessible because they are drowned out by activity. Here, they are audible, but they do not speak in words. They speak in stability, a sense that nothing needs to happen right now, a sense that nothing is wrong, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being demanded. This is one of the rarest experiences in modern life, a moment with no demand. And because it is rare, it can feel unfamiliar. Some people mistake this unfamiliarity for discomfort. They sense the absence of urgency and feel exposed. Urgency is a shield. Without it, you are simply here. That simplicity can feel vast. If you allow it, this vastness becomes soothing. If you resist it, the mind may snap back toward surface awareness. But if you remain passive, if you do not try to define what is happening, the descent continues. At this depth, sensory input fades further. Sounds lose location. Touch loses boundary. The body is still present, but not foregrounded. You are aware of being embodied without focusing on any specific part. This diffuse embodiment is another signal that the brain is transitioning. The maps that define body boundaries in waking life are loosening, not disconnecting, loosening. This allows the brain to shift into modes where self-location is unnecessary. Modes where experience does not require a point of view. This is important because deeper sleep requires the suspension of point of view. Dreaming may reintroduce a point of view later, but not yet. Right now, the brain is clearing the stage. Another subtle change occurs here. Attention stops moving. Earlier, attention drifted. Here, even drifting slows. There is no longer a sense of following anything. Awareness becomes evenly distributed, like light filling a room rather than shining on objects. This evenness is deeply restful because movement of attention is effortful. Even curiosity requires movement. Here, curiosity fades, not from boredom, from sufficiency. There is nothing missing, nothing to search for. This sufficiency is fragile, not because it is weak, but because the waking mind is unused to it. The habit of seeking can reassert itself. If it does, attention sharpens again and the mind rises slightly. But if the habit remains dormant, the mind continues downward. This downward movement is not falling. It is yielding to gravity, yielding to rhythm, yielding to the body's intelligence. The body knows how to sleep. The mind often forgets. Here, the mind remembers by stepping aside. As this chapter of descent continues, you may notice that thoughts no longer form at all, or if they do, they dissolve immediately. There is no attempt to complete them. This is not confusion. It is disinterest. The brain has decided that thought is no longer useful. That decision is not conscious. It is functional. Energy is being redirected from cognition to restoration, from interpretation to repair. This is where sleep becomes truly restorative, not because you are unconscious, but because the systems that consume energy through awareness have powered down. And yet, there is still a trace of knowing. A thin thread of awareness remains. Not observing, not narrating, just present. This thread will eventually dissolve too, but not abruptly. It thins gradually, like a sound fading beyond hearing. You don't notice the exact moment it disappears. You only notice later that it did. That is how the transition completes. Not with a line, with a gradient. And as this gradient continues, as awareness spreads thinner and thinner, as self-reference loosens further, the mind approaches a depth where nothing needs to be held at all, where experience no longer needs to be registered, and where rest finally becomes complete. Somewhere beyond this point, the mind stops caring whether it is aware, not because awareness is lost, but because awareness no longer needs to confirm itself. Up to now, there has always been a faint sense of being here. Even when thoughts dissolved, even when the sense of self softened, something remained that could say without words, "This is happening." Here, even that begins to thin. This is not the disappearance of consciousness. It is the disappearance of the need to witness it. The brain is entering a phase where monitoring becomes unnecessary. During the day, monitoring is constant. Am I safe? Am I doing this right? What comes next? These questions don't always appear as thoughts, but they shape attention. Monitoring is vigilance, and vigilance is expensive. At this depth, vigilance releases. The systems responsible for tracking errors, predicting outcomes, and maintaining narrative coherence quiet down further. Not abruptly, methodically. The brain is reallocating energy from awareness to maintenance, from observation to repair. You are no longer hovering at the edge of sleep. You are inside the descent. But the descent is so gradual that it doesn't feel like movement. It feels like stillness deepening. This is where the body becomes the primary reference, not as sensation, but as rhythm. Breath continues, but it is no longer noticed. Heartbeat continues, but it is no longer felt. The body is doing what it knows how to do without commentary. And because the mind is no longer supervising, the body can finally work without interference. This is where the deepest forms of rest begin. Not the rest of unconsciousness, the rest of non-resistance. Resistance, even subtle resistance, keeps systems alert. Here, resistance dissolves. That dissolution allows processes, usually drowned out by waking activity, to emerge. Hormonal regulation shifts. Immune signaling changes. Neural repair mechanisms activate more fully. These processes do not require awareness. In fact, They function best without it. That is why awareness must thin for restoration to deepen. This is also why people often wake from nights like this feeling altered in ways they cannot explain. Something fundamental has been adjusted. Not a thought, not a belief, a baseline. Baseline determines how much effort life requires. When baseline is high, everything feels harder than it should. When baseline lowers, effort decreases without changing circumstances. This adjustment happens here, quietly, without sensation, without memory. It does not feel like anything because it is foundational. Foundations do not announce themselves. They simply support what comes later. At this depth, dreams may or may not appear. If they do, they are often sparse, not narrative-driven, not emotional, just images drifting without significance. These are not messages. They are byproducts. The brain testing pattern generation without control. If dreams do not appear, that is also normal. This depth does not require imagery. It requires disengagement. The brain has already gathered what it needed from earlier layers. Memories have been softened. Truths have been registered. Orientation has been adjusted. Now, the work is physical, cellular, electrical, chemical. This is where the concept of sleep diverges from experience. From the outside, sleep looks like absence. From the inside, it is intense activity, just not activity you can witness. Awareness recedes because it is no longer useful, not because it is unwanted, because it consumes resources needed elsewhere. This is why attempts to remain aware at this depth often result in lighter sleep. Awareness pulls energy back toward monitoring. Monitoring interrupts repair. The brain gently discourages awareness here, not with force, with boredom. Nothing interesting happens here. No insights, no realizations, no sensations worth following. That lack of stimulation is intentional. It allows the mind to let go completely. You are not meant to remember this part of the night. Memory formation is turned down. What would be the point? This state does not exist to be recalled. It exists to prepare you for tomorrow without asking you to think about it. This is one of the most counterintuitive truths about rest. The most restorative moments are the least memorable. People often judge sleep by how much they remember dreaming. But dreaming is not the measure of restoration. Depth is, and depth leaves no trace. If awareness lingers too long here, the brain gently redirects it. It may surface briefly, a flicker of thought, a half image, a sensation of turning over. These are not awakenings. They are adjustments. The brain ensuring that posture, circulation, and breathing remain optimal. Then awareness sinks again. Each time, it sinks faster, because there is less to hold it up. This is the part of the night where time disappears completely. Not because it slows, but because nothing is marking it. No events, no transitions, no narrative, just continuity. This continuity is what allows systems to synchronize. Neural oscillations align, hormonal pulses stabilize, physiological rhythms entrain. Synchronization reduces noise. Noise is energy loss. Reducing noise is efficiency. Efficiency is restoration. This is also where the emotional tone of the coming day is seated. Not consciously. Your waking mood tomorrow will not be determined by what you think in the morning. It will be influenced by how deeply this synchronization occurred. This is why some mornings feel grounded even before anything happens, and why others feel fragile for no obvious reason. The difference often lies here, in a depth you never noticed. As this chapter of the night continues, awareness becomes so thin that even noticing its thinning is no longer possible. There is no observer left to track the transition, only the process itself. This is the quietest point, the most complete release. And because there is nothing to witness, there is nothing to describe. The night moves on without you knowing. Cycles continue. Phases shift. The brain does its work. And eventually, far later awareness will begin to gather again. Not yet. Not now. For now, the mind has finally stopped asking anything of itself. And in that absence of demand, the night holds you completely. When awareness gathers again after this depth, it does not arrive with questions. There is no sudden thought of where am I or what time is it. No impulse to move. No urge to check anything. Awareness returns quietly, like light seeping through closed curtains. This return is not a reversal of rest. It is part of it. By now, the brain has already done much of what it needed to do. Tension has been redistributed. Baseline has been adjusted. Noise has been reduced. What remains is not processing, but stabilization. You are not thinking again. You are present again. There is a difference. Presence here does not imply alertness. It implies coherence. The mind feels whole, not sharp. There is no fragmentation, no urgency pulling attention in multiple directions. If anything, attention feels broad and even. This is why people sometimes describe this phase as empty, even though it isn't. Nothing is missing. Nothing is added. It is not emptiness. It is equilibrium. Equilibrium rarely draws attention to itself. In waking life, imbalance is loud. Pain signals. Stress escalates. Desire demands. Balance is quiet. And because it is quiet, it is often overlooked. But this is one of the most important moments of the night, because this is where integration settles into form. Earlier in the night, the brain softened memories and adjusted emotional weight. At the deepest point, it synchronized systems and restored baseline. Here, it consolidates those changes, not as memory, as readiness. Readiness for the next cycle. Readiness for waking. Readiness for continuity. The mind is not preparing you for action yet. It is preparing you for stability. You might notice that sensations here are minimal, not absent, muted. The body feels distant but reliable. Breathing is steady. There is no discomfort asking for attention. This lack of signal is meaningful. The nervous system is no longer scanning for problems. It has found none worth reporting. That absence of reporting is what allows rest to persist. If you have ever woken in the middle of the night and felt a sense of calm that didn't quite feel like sleep, this is likely the state you touched. It doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel like insight. It feels like nothing is wrong. That feeling is rare. During the day, something is always slightly wrong. Something to fix. Something to improve. Something to anticipate. Here, those impulses are offline. Not suppressed, irrelevant. And because they are irrelevant, they do not generate tension. The brain is not trying to solve anything. It is maintaining balance. Maintenance is invisible work. You don't feel it happening. You feel the absence of breakdown. This is why this phase is often shorter and less noticeable than earlier awakenings. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't interrupt. It simply is. Sometimes awareness here flickers in and out, a brief sense of being present. Then nothing again. These flickers are not awakenings. They are checkpoints. The brain periodically checks whether conditions remain optimal. If they do, awareness is allowed to dissolve again. If not, it may resurface slightly to adjust posture, breathing, or circulation. This is why you might change position without remembering doing so, or swallow, or take a deeper breath. These are not conscious actions. They are maintenance routines. The mind remains uninvolved. At this point, thinking is inefficient. Thinking consumes energy. The brain avoids it. If a thought does arise here, it feels thin and unconvincing. It doesn't hook. It doesn't lead anywhere. It dissolves almost immediately. This is not because the thought was unimportant. It is because importance itself is not relevant here. Importance requires comparison. Comparison requires reference. Reference has been suspended, so thoughts cannot gain traction. They pass through like faint ripples on still water. This stillness is not passive. It is actively maintained. Neural systems that inhibit unnecessary activity are engaged, not forcefully, smoothly. This inhibition allows for sustained low-noise operation. Low noise means higher signal clarity when needed. This is why waking after nights that include this phase often feels clearer. Not because you slept longer, but because the mind had time to quiet completely. Quiet does not mean empty. It means undistorted. You may notice that emotional tone here is neutral, not numb, balanced. Emotions are present as potential, not as activity. They are available but inactive, like instruments resting between movements. This neutrality is sometimes mistaken for dullness, but dullness implies lack. This implies readiness. When emotion is not actively engaged, it can respond accurately later. When emotion is constantly active, it becomes blunt. This is one of the subtle benefits of deep rest. It sharpens responsiveness by allowing inactivity. At this stage, the brain is also calibrating thresholds. How easily you will be startled tomorrow. How quickly irritation will arise. How much stimulation you can tolerate before feeling overwhelmed. These thresholds are not set by conscious choice. They are set here, in the absence of demand. That is why rest affects resilience, not just energy. Resilience is not about having more capacity. It is about not wasting capacity unnecessarily. This calibration determines that. You cannot will it. You can only allow the conditions under which it occurs. Those conditions are present now. Another subtle shift occurs here. The sense of continuity strengthens. Earlier, awareness was fragmented. Time dissolved. Narrative vanished. Here, continuity returns, but without story. There is a sense that things are connected again, not in sequence, in presence. You are not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, but you are no longer floating. You are grounded. This grounding does not feel like heaviness. It feels like stability. That stability is what allows the next cycle of sleep to proceed smoothly, without disruption, without abrupt awakenings. This phase acts as a buffer, a quiet platform from which deeper or lighter sleep can emerge as needed. If the night continues with deeper sleep, this stability allows the transition to occur without resistance. If the night shifts toward lighter sleep or dreaming, this stability prevents emotional spillover. Either way, it protects coherence. That protection is important, because without it, unresolved material from earlier layers could resurface chaotically. Here, that material has already been integrated enough to remain dormant. Dormancy is not suppression. It is completion. There is nothing left to process at this level, so the mind rests, not because it is tired, but because it is finished. Finished does not mean final. It means sufficient, for now. As the night progresses, awareness may fade entirely again, or it may remain as a faint background presence. Both are normal. What matters is not whether you notice this phase, but that it occurs. It often does, even if you never remember it. And its effects extend beyond the night. They shape how you enter the day, how reactive you feel, how grounded you are, how easily you can remain present under pressure. These qualities do not come from insight. They come from balance. Balance is set here, quietly, without commentary, without memory. As this equilibrium holds, as the nervous system maintains its steady rhythm, as awareness no longer feels the need to define itself, the night continues its slow arc, preparing, without urgency, for the gradual return toward morning. By the time awareness drifts near the surface again, something important has already changed, even if you don't feel it yet. The mind that returns now is not the same one that went down. Not because it learned something new, not because it solved anything, but because something was set down. This is the phase where forgetting becomes active. Not forgetting as loss, forgetting as design. During the day, memory is treated like storage. Something happens, and you try to keep it. At night, memory behaves differently. The brain is no longer asking, "What should be saved?" It is asking, "What no longer needs to be carried?" And this question is answered without language. You may have noticed this before. A night passes, and in the morning, the sharpness of a feeling is gone. Not erased, softened. You can still recall the event, but the emotional edge has dulled. You didn't decide to let it go. You didn't reason your way through it. It simply lost its grip. That loss is not accidental. It is the result of selective forgetting. The brain does not forget randomly. It forgets strategically. What is forgotten here is not information. It is charge, the emotional voltage attached to experience. During waking life, that charge is useful. It signals importance. It motivates action. It ensures survival. But once the moment has passed, excess charge becomes noise. Noise distorts perception. Noise drains energy. Noise keeps the nervous system alert when alertness is no longer required. This is where the night intervenes. In earlier layers, the brain revisited memories gently, allowing them to be felt without resistance. That alone reduced their intensity. Here, something deeper happens. The brain decouples memory from urgency. The event remains. The meaning remains. But the need to react dissolves. This is why the memories that survive the night often feel flatter, less vivid, less intrusive. They have been integrated into context. Context neutralizes threat. A memory without threat does not demand attention. So, it recedes. This is also why trying to remember everything that happened during the night is impossible. The night is not designed to be remembered. It is designed to recalibrate. Recalibration does not leave a trail. It leaves an effect. This phase where forgetting consolidates is one of the most misunderstood aspects of sleep. People often equate forgetting with failure. They believe that if they don't remember insights, those insights were meaningless. But meaning here does not depend on recall. It depends on impact. You may not remember what your mind touched during the night, but your reactions tomorrow will remember for you. You will pause slightly longer before responding. You will feel less pulled by things that once provoked you. You will notice a faint increase in tolerance. These changes are not conscious. They are structural, and structure is built here. This is why nights that feel blank are often the most restorative. Nothing stood out. Nothing was memorable, which means nothing interfered. The brain was able to complete its work without being observed. Observation, even self-observation, leaves traces. Trace requires storage. Storage requires prioritization. Here, prioritization is suspended, so forgetting is allowed to do its job fully. There is another kind of forgetting that happens here, quieter, deeper. The forgetting of unnecessary identity. During the day, you reinforce who you are constantly. Through habits, through reactions, through repetition. These reinforcements are not fixed. They are maintained, and maintenance requires energy. At night, especially in this phase, some of that maintenance relaxes. Not completely, but enough. Roles loosen. Self-descriptions blur. You are no longer actively being someone. You are simply existing. This temporary release allows the brain to reassess which aspects of identity are still useful, not through reflection, through absence. If something is not reinforced, it weakens. If it weakens without consequence, it may not need to be reinforced again. This is how identity shifts without crisis. Gradually, quietly. You don't wake up a different person. You wake up slightly less attached to parts of yourself that no longer fit. And because this detachment happened without drama, it feels natural. This is one of the hidden gifts of sleep. It allows change without confrontation. During the day, change requires effort. You must notice the problem. Name it. Decide to act. At night, change happens through omission. Something is simply not picked back up. You don't notice what you didn't pick up. You only notice later that your hands feel lighter. This phase also prepares the mind for the return of memory in a different form. Not detailed memory, procedural memory. The memory of how to respond, how to regulate, how to remain steady. These memories are not verbal. They live in posture, tone, timing. They shape how you speak, how you listen, how you pause. And because they are not explicit, they are hard to trace back to a source. You feel changed without knowing why. That is not confusion. That is integration working as intended. At this stage of the night, awareness is often minimal. You may not feel awake at all. If awareness does flicker, it is diffuse and uninvested. There is no curiosity, no attempt to hold on to anything. This lack of interest is crucial. Interest creates memory. Disinterest allows forgetting. The brain is choosing what not to keep. And that choice is not arbitrary. It is guided by resonance. Whatever still carries emotional weight may surface earlier. Whatever no longer carries weight is allowed to fade completely. By the time this phase arrives, much of the sorting is already done. What remains is cleanup. Quiet, methodical. This cleanup is not glamorous. It does not produce insight. It produces space. Space in which future experiences can land without colliding with the past. This is why sleep deprivation makes everything feel overwhelming. Without this forgetting phase, yesterday remains too present. Every new stimulus stacks on top of unresolved residue. Fatigue is not just lack of energy. It is lack of clearance. Here, clearance happens. Not by erasing the past, by contextualizing it so thoroughly that it no longer intrudes. This is also why people sometimes wake with the sense that a problem has shrunk. Not solved, not gone, just smaller. Small enough to coexist with other things. That shrinking did not require thought. It required perspective. Perspective is adjusted here, not through distance in time, but through distance in charge. A memory with less charge occupies less space. It still exists. It just no longer dominates. This is the quiet success of forgetting. As this phase continues, the brain becomes increasingly economical. Activity decreases further. Only essential processes remain. The mind is no longer available for exploration. If awareness appears, it drifts without attachment. There is nothing to engage with. This is intentional. The brain is creating conditions for continuity. Continuity between night and morning. If too much awareness intruded here, the transition would be abrupt. Abrupt transitions shock the nervous system. Gentle transitions preserve balance. So the night smooths itself out, layer by layer. By the time this phase completes, the mind is largely empty of unfinished business. Not because everything is resolved, but because nothing is urgent. Urgency has been metabolized. And without urgency, rest deepens naturally. Soon, not yet, the cycle will begin to turn upward. Hormones will shift. Temperature will rise slightly. Sensitivity to light will increase. But before any of that happens, the mind remains here, in a state that is not sleep as you imagine it, and not wakefulness as you know it. A state of quiet readiness. Everything is in place. Nothing is being asked. Nothing is being held. And in that absence of demand, the night continues to do its work, unseen, unremembered, but deeply effective. When awareness returns again, it does not feel like waking. It feels like being gathered, not pulled, not summoned, gathered, as if something that was spread thin across the night is slowly drawing itself back together. You are not alert. You are not thinking. But there is a sense of cohesion forming. Earlier, forgetting was active. Weights were set down. Charges were neutralized. Now, something quieter happens. The body remembers. Not memories as images or stories, but memories as posture, as tone, as readiness. You may notice a faint sense of solidity returning. Not tension, not effort. Structure. The body feels more here again, even if you are still deeply asleep. This is not the return of control. It is the return of alignment. Throughout the night, different layers of you have been loosened, softened, thinned, and quieted. Here, they begin to settle into a new configuration. Not dramatically, incrementally, like sand after a wave passes. Nothing has to be forced. Gravity does the work. This phase is where the effects of the night become embodied. Earlier, the brain adjusted emotional weight. Later, it synchronized systems and reduced noise. Then, it selectively forgot what no longer needed to be carried. Now, the body incorporates those changes. This is why the body often feels different in the morning, even when you slept in the same position for the same number of hours. Something has shifted underneath awareness. Muscle tone subtly recalibrates. Some tensions do not return. Others return lighter than before. This is not random. The nervous system has reassessed what needs to be held. During the day, many muscles remain engaged, not for movement, but for protection. Jaw, shoulders, abdomen. These areas often hold readiness long after danger has passed. At night, when vigilance dissolves, the nervous system finally has permission to ask, is this still necessary? If the answer is no, the signal to maintain that tension weakens. Not permanently, just enough. This is why chronic tension feels different after a good night's rest. Not gone, but quieter. The same process occurs emotionally. Earlier, emotional charge was reduced. Now, emotional posture is adjusted. Posture is how you meet experience, not what you feel, but how easily feelings arise, escalate, or pass. At this stage, the nervous system is tuning that posture. How quickly you will react, how long emotions will linger, how much stimulation you can tolerate before feeling overwhelmed. These settings are not chosen. They are sensed. The body remembers what it can handle. It recalibrates based on the absence of threat. This is why nights of safety are so important. Safety allows recalibration downward. When safety is missing, even subtly, the body keeps its defenses high. Sleep may still occur, but it is shallow. Recalibration requires trust. Trust that nothing will be asked of you. Here, trust has been established. Nothing was demanded throughout the night. No alarms. No emergencies. No interruptions that required action. So the nervous system lowers its guard further. This lowering is often experienced as heaviness, not exhaustion. Grounding. You feel more in your body, even while asleep. This embodiment is quiet. There is no sensation calling for attention, just presence. The mind, now largely uninvolved, allows the body to lead. This reversal is significant. During the day, the mind directs the body. At night, the body instructs the mind. It says, this is how much tension is necessary. This is how much alertness is required. This is the rhythm we will use tomorrow. The mind listens not actively, but implicitly. This listening reshapes baseline. Baseline is not mood. Baseline is readiness. How close to activation you live by default. A high baseline means you are always almost reacting. A lower baseline means you have room. Room for pause. Room for choice. Room for nuance. This phase lowers baseline without effort. You do not wake up thinking, I am calmer now. You wake up responding more calmly without noticing. That is the mark of true integration, not awareness of change. Change without awareness. This is also where continuity begins to form again. Earlier, time dissolved. Narrative disappeared. Here, the sense of ongoingness returns. Not as story, as flow. You are not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, but you are no longer suspended. There is a sense that things are moving again slowly. This movement is not linear. It is cyclical. The body recognizes the larger rhythm. Night does not end abruptly. It turns. And this turning begins here. Hormonal signals shift subtly. Cortisol, which dropped earlier, remains low but is no longer suppressed. It is being prepared to rise later. Body temperature, which lowered to facilitate deep rest, stabilizes. The brain does not rush this process. Abrupt changes destabilize. Gradual transitions preserve balance. This phase ensures that when waking eventually occurs, it does not feel violent. No shock, no jolt, just emergence. You may notice that awareness here, if it appears at all, feels neutral, not curious, not resistant. It does not ask what is happening. It does not attempt to define the state. It simply exists alongside it. This is a sign that self-monitoring remains offline. The mind is present but not supervising. That is exactly what allows the body to complete its adjustments. Supervision reintroduces control. Control raises baseline. Here, baseline must remain low, so awareness stays quiet. If a thought arises, it feels thin. It does not stick. There is no energy behind it. Thoughts require tension to persist. Here, tension is minimal, so thoughts evaporate. This is not because thinking is impossible. It is because thinking is unnecessary. The system is complete. Nothing requires interpretation. At this point in the night, dreams may or may not appear. If they do, they tend to be muted, not emotionally charged, not urgent. They may feel symbolic without meaning, scenes without narrative. These are not messages. They are echoes. Residual pattern generation occurring as systems shift. You do not need to engage with them. Engagement would raise arousal. The brain keeps engagement low. This is also why external stimuli often go unnoticed here. Sounds may occur without registering. Light may change without response. The brain has deprioritized sensory input, not shut it off, set it aside. This deprioritization allows internal alignment to complete. Alignment is fragile, not because it is weak, but because it depends on uninterrupted quiet. This phase protects that quiet. As it continues, the sense of being someone becomes more implicit. Earlier, identity loosened. Here, it returns, but without weight. You are you again, but without narrative. Without history pressing in. Without future pulling forward. Just presence. This presence is the foundation upon which waking consciousness will rebuild. If this foundation is stable, waking feels grounded. If it is rushed, waking feels brittle. This is why alarm clocks can feel jarring. They interrupt this phase. They force awareness upward before integration has settled. The body reacts by raising baseline quickly. This often feels like stress even before the day begins. When this phase completes naturally, baseline rises gently. The nervous system transitions smoothly. You wake without knowing why. You feel steadier. That steadiness comes from here, from this quiet consolidation. Nothing flashy happened. No insight was gained. No dream was remembered. But something essential was put into place. The relationship between mind and body was renegotiated. The terms were softened. The body agreed to carry you into the next day with less resistance. The mind agreed to listen more, without demanding explanations. This agreement is not conscious. It is embodied. And because it is embodied, it persists. As this phase draws toward completion, awareness remains minimal. There is no anticipation of morning, no sense of approaching light. That comes later. For now, the night holds steady. Everything is aligned enough. Nothing needs attention. Nothing needs to be processed. The system rests not because it is empty, but because it is satisfied. And in that satisfaction, the quiet rhythm continues, unhurried, unobserved, preparing gently for the slow return that will come in its own time. There is a moment in the night when nothing new is happening. And that is precisely why it matters. Not because the night has become empty, but because it has become stable. All the earlier movements have slowed. The sorting, the softening, the forgetting, the quiet realignment between mind and body. They have done what they needed to do. Now, the system rests inside the result. This phase does not announce itself. It does not feel like a transition. It feels like continuity. If awareness brushes against it at all, it may feel almost boring. Nothing to notice, nothing to follow, nothing to hold. That boredom is not a lack. It is the absence of disturbance. The brain at this stage is no longer reorganizing content. It is maintaining coherence. Maintenance is different from processing. Processing changes things. Maintenance preserves conditions. And the condition being preserved now is balance. Balance between activation and rest. Between sensitivity and stability. Between openness and containment. Earlier in the night, openness was necessary. Memories needed space. Truths needed room to surface. Now, openness would be destabilizing. So the brain gently closes certain gates, not shutting them, resting them. This is why emotional material no longer surfaces here, not because it was suppressed, but because it has already been integrated enough. If something unresolved were still active, it would have appeared earlier. The fact that nothing appears now is itself information. It means the system is sufficiently aligned. That alignment is fragile, not in the sense of weakness, but in the sense that it requires quiet to persist. This is why the brain becomes especially conservative here. It avoids stimulation. It avoids novelty. It avoids internal exploration. Exploration consumes energy. Energy is being conserved now, not hoarded, directed toward long-term restoration, cellular repair, neural maintenance, immune regulation. These processes are subtle but demanding. They require a low-noise environment. That is why the mind feels empty. Not because nothing is happening, but because nothing should be noticed. Awareness, if present, floats without anchor. It does not attach to thought. It does not pursue sensation. This floating is not dissociation. It is disengagement. Disengagement allows the deeper systems to work uninterrupted. This is also where the night becomes most uniform. Earlier phases varied. Some nights were heavier, some lighter, some filled with fleeting awareness. Here, nights are similar. This phase is consistent across people, across circumstances. It is the most standardized part of sleep, which is why it rarely appears in memory. Memory prefers contrast. This phase has none. It is smooth. That smoothness is its function. Think of it as the night's buffer, a wide, calm region that absorbs any residual fluctuations. If something stirs a sound, a movement, a bodily adjustment of this region dampens it. It prevents the stir from propagating upward into wakefulness. That damping is important. Without it, sleep would be brittle. Small disturbances would cause full awakenings. This phase provides resilience, not psychological resilience, physiological resilience, the ability to remain asleep despite minor changes. This is why people who lack this phase often report light sleep, not because they never fall asleep, but because they never reach this stable plateau. Their sleep remains reactive. Every stimulus pulls them upward. The nervous system never fully trusts the environment. Here, trust has been established. Nothing has happened for long enough, so the system relaxes further. Relaxation here is not release. It is settling. Release happened earlier. Settling means holding the new configuration steady. Like letting glue dry. You do not move things while glue sets. Movement would ruin alignment. So everything stays still. This stillness can feel profound if noticed, but it rarely is noticed. And that is intentional. The brain does not want attention here. Attention would reintroduce variability. Variability would destabilize. So attention fades. Not by force, by lack of invitation. There is nothing interesting enough to follow. The mind, used to stimulation, drifts away. This is not failure. It is success. This phase also plays a role in memory boundaries. It creates separation between days. Without it, experiences from one day bleed too easily into the next. You wake carrying too much of yesterday. Here, the boundary is reinforced. Yesterday is put at a distance, not erased. Contextualized. Context allows memory without intrusion. That distance is what allows freshness. You wake feeling that the day is new, not because nothing bad happened yesterday, but because yesterday has been placed where it belongs, behind you. This boundary formation does not require thought. It is built through rhythm, through sustained inactivity, through the absence of recall. This is why people who sleep poorly often feel as if days blur together. The boundary never solidifies. Everything feels immediate. Nothing feels complete. Here, completion happens quietly, without declaration. Completion does not feel like accomplishment. It feels like neutrality. Nothing pressing, nothing unfinished. Just enough closure to move on. Another subtle process occurs here. The brain is adjusting prediction models. During the day, your brain constantly predicts what will happen next. These predictions are shaped by recent experience. If the day was stressful, predictions skew negative. If the day was chaotic, predictions become hypervigilant. At night, these prediction models are recalibrated. Earlier phases softened emotional charge. Here, predictions are normalized. The brain reminds itself of baseline safety, that most moments do not require reaction, that not everything needs to be anticipated. This recalibration reduces anticipatory anxiety, not by convincing you, by resetting expectations. Expectations are physiological. They live in nervous system readiness. They are tuned here. That tuning influences how you wake. If predictions remain skewed, waking feels tense. If predictions normalize, waking feels neutral or even light. Again, you do not notice this tuning happen. You only notice its absence when it does not occur. At this stage, awareness is minimal. If you were to wake someone now, they would feel disoriented, not because they were in deep sleep, but because the sense of narrative is completely offline. Narrative requires continuity. Here, continuity exists without story. You are present, without identity, without past, without future, just being. This being is not mystical. It is functional. It is the nervous system at rest. The brain is not seeking meaning. It is seeking efficiency. Efficiency allows longevity. This is also where long-term stability is built. Not emotional stability, physiological stability. The kind that determines how easily stress accumulates over time. This phase reduces allostatic load, the cost of living. You do not feel load decreasing. You feel less burdened later. This is why chronic sleep disruption leads to cumulative exhaustion. Without this phase, load is never fully reduced. It accumulates day after day. Fatigue becomes baseline. Here, baseline is lowered, just a little. But night after night, those little reductions matter. They compound. As this phase continues, there is no sense of direction, no movement toward waking yet. That comes later. For now, the system is content to remain here. Stable, quiet, unchanging. If awareness flickers, it quickly fades again. There is nothing to anchor it. This is not suppression. It is redundancy. Awareness is simply not needed. Everything that required attention has already been addressed. The system is in maintenance mode, and maintenance does not require observation. This is the least dramatic part of the night, and one of the most essential. It ensures that when change comes again toward morning, it will be gradual. that the system will not be shocked, that the return to consciousness will feel natural. This plateau is the night's way of holding space. Space for integration to settle. Space for repairs to complete. Space for rhythm to reassert itself. Nothing more needs to happen. And because nothing more needs to happen, nothing does. The night stays here. Steady, balanced, unremarkable. Until, slowly, without announcement, the conditions begin to shift again. And the system prepares gently for the next turn in the cycle. There is a subtle change in the night that almost no one notices. It doesn't feel like movement. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like readiness. Nothing has happened yet, but something is no longer resisting the idea that something could. Up to now, the night has been about descent, settling, and preservation. The system lowered its defenses. Noise was reduced. Balance was maintained. Now, without breaking that balance, the first signs of transition begin. Not toward waking, toward possibility. This is the stage where the brain quietly asks a new question. Not what needs to be processed, not what needs to be fixed, but what can safely begin again. The answer, at first, is almost nothing. And that is important. The nervous system does not flip states abruptly. Abrupt transitions create shock. Instead, it introduces potential gently. You might think of this as the night loosening its grip just slightly. Sleep is still dominant. Rest is still deep. But the absolute stillness of the plateau begins to soften, not with activity, with flexibility. Flexibility is the capacity to change without tension. Earlier, rigidity was necessary to preserve alignment. Now, rigidity would prevent transition. So the system relaxes its hold a fraction. This fraction is enough. At this stage, awareness may flicker again. But if it does, it feels different from earlier awakenings. There is no depth pulling you inward. There is no heaviness anchoring you down. Instead, there is a lightness, not alertness, not clarity, lightness, a sense that awareness could rise, but is not required to. This is why some people experience brief moments of semi-awareness near morning and drift back easily. There is no urgency pushing them upward yet. The system is testing responsiveness. It asks, if awareness appears, will it destabilize us? If the answer is no, awareness is allowed to hover briefly. If awareness begins to sharpen to orient, to ask questions, the system withdraws again. This testing is gentle. It is not trying to wake you. It is mapping the boundary. Boundaries are important. Without knowing where the boundary is, the system cannot cross it smoothly later. This phase defines the edge between sleep and the coming return. Another change occurs here, quieter still. The brain's sensitivity to external cues increases slightly. Not enough to wake you, just enough to register. Light through curtains, distant sounds, temperature shifts. These cues do not enter consciousness. They enter calibration. The brain begins to synchronize internal rhythms with the external environment again. This synchronization is not immediate. It is gradual. The night does not end suddenly. It aligns itself with the world before releasing you back into it. This is why waking naturally feels different from waking abruptly. Natural waking is preceded by this alignment. Abrupt waking interrupts it. The nervous system is still tuned inward and suddenly must respond outward. That shock is felt as grogginess, irritability, or confusion. Here, the system is preventing that shock. It is reopening channels carefully. Another subtle process occurs here. Emotional neutrality begins to shift, not toward emotion, toward availability. Earlier, emotions were inactive. Here, they become accessible again, but remain quiet. Like lights dimmed, but ready. This matters. If emotions were to activate suddenly at waking, they would overwhelm. Instead, the system ensures that emotional responsiveness is gradual. This is why moods in the morning often feel muted, not because you feel nothing, but because the system has not yet raised emotional gain. Gain will be adjusted later based on context. Here, it remains low. This prevents overreaction. This is also where the difference between people who wake easily and those who struggle becomes apparent. Some nervous systems are comfortable with gradual transitions. Others are accustomed to constant vigilance. For those accustomed to vigilance, even this gentle reopening can feel destabilizing. They may surface fully too early. Their minds may begin narrating. Once narration begins, the system shifts upward rapidly. This is not a failure of sleep. It is a habit of alertness. The night accommodates this by allowing brief awakenings, but those awakenings lack the grounding of earlier depth. They feel shallow. Rest is still occurring beneath them, but awareness is now interfering. This is why the instruction, "Don't worry about being awake," is so important here. Worry increases arousal. Arousal accelerates the transition prematurely. The system is still preparing. It does not need help. At this stage, thinking feels slightly easier than before, but it still feels unproductive. Thoughts do not organize well. They do not lead anywhere. This is intentional. The brain is not ready for planning or analysis. It is ready for orientation. Orientation comes before thinking. Orientation answers a basic question. Where am I in relation to the world? Not physically, existentially. This orientation is not verbal. It is felt. A sense of being closer to the surface of life. Not in it yet. Closer. This sense often manifests as lighter sleep. Dreams may return here, but they are different from earlier imagery. They may feel closer to reality, more coherent, still not fully narrative, but less fragmented. These dreams are transitional. They help bridge internal states. They are not symbolic messages. They are rehearsal. The brain practicing coherence again, not for interpretation, for readiness. This rehearsal ensures that when waking occurs, the mind can organize experience quickly, without jolt, without confusion. At this stage, bodily sensations may reappear faintly. Pressure, where you lie. Subtle awareness of limbs. Not discomfort. Reconnection. The body is re-entering the field of awareness. Earlier, the body was background. Now, it is gently reintroduced. This reintroduction is slow to prevent sudden reactivation of muscle tone. Muscle tone will rise later. For now, the body remains mostly relaxed, but it is no longer absent. This is important. Waking requires embodiment. Before waking, the body must return to awareness gradually. Otherwise, waking feels disorienting. Here, that gradual return begins. Another shift occurs in breathing. Earlier, breathing was automatic and unnoticed. Now, it becomes slightly more responsive, not controlled. Responsive. Breath may deepen or change rhythms subtly. This is not conscious. It is the nervous system testing flexibility. Flexibility in breathing indicates readiness for increased activity, but activity is still deferred. Everything here is preliminary. No final decisions are made. The system is simply reopening options. The night is loosening its hold, but not releasing it yet. This is why you might feel as though you could wake, but don't. Or wake briefly and fall back easily. The system is checking. Checking does not mean committing. It means preparing. This stage is also where the night protects you from premature mental load. If you have responsibilities waiting, they do not intrude yet. The mind does not rehearse. It does not plan. That comes later. Here, the mind is intentionally kept simple. Complexity raises arousal. Arousal disrupts gradual transition. So complexity is avoided. If thoughts arise, they are vague. Impressions rather than plans. A sense of later without content. This is enough. As this phase continues, the night maintains its calm. It does not rush. It does not signal. There is no countdown to morning. Morning will come when the system is ready, not when the clock demands it. This readiness is built layer by layer. Earlier layers ensured rest. This layer ensures continuity. Continuity between sleep and waking. Without it, waking would feel like a rupture. With it, waking feels like emergence. This is why people often say they drift awake on good mornings. That drifting began here, long before awareness returned fully, long before eyes opened. The system has already begun its turn, slowly, quietly, without asking for attention. Nothing needs to be done. Nothing needs to be held. The night still holds you, but its grip is lighter now. And in that lightness, the conditions quietly assemble for the next shift, one that will eventually bring awareness back into focus, without force, without urgency. In its own time, there is a moment when the night stops pulling you inward and begins asking nothing of you at all, not even rest. Up to this point, the system has been moving with intention, softening, stabilizing, preparing. Now intention dissolves. This is the quietest transition of the entire cycle. And, paradoxically, one of the most fragile. Because here, the mind is free enough to interfere and empty enough to not know why it shouldn't. Earlier in the night, depth protected you. Gravity held awareness down. Later, structure preserved balance. Stability prevented disturbance. Here, neither force nor structure dominates. What remains is openness, not the openness of curiosity, the openness of availability. Nothing is happening. Nothing needs to happen. And because nothing needs to happen, the system becomes sensitive to anything that tries to happen. This is where many people unknowingly disrupt the cycle, not by doing something dramatic, but by noticing too much. A small thought appears, not urgent, not emotional, just a flicker. Am I waking up? That question alone changes everything, because the moment awareness turns toward itself, the system interprets it as intent. Intent signals readiness. Readiness accelerates transition. The mind rises, not because it needs to, but because it thinks it should. This is not a failure. It is a habit. The waking mind is trained to engage. When given space, it fills it. But this space is not meant to be filled. It is meant to remain empty long enough for the transition to complete naturally. This is why this stage is often experienced as light, restless sleep. Not uncomfortable, but unstable. You may drift in and out of awareness, not deeply awake, not deeply asleep. Each time awareness appears, it feels thin. It does not bring clarity. It does not bring energy, just presence. And presence, at this stage, is enough to tilt the balance. This is where the difference between allowing and monitoring becomes critical. Allowing feels passive, but it is active in its restraint. Monitoring feels harmless, but it introduces tension. Monitoring asks, what is happening now? Allowing says nothing. The nervous system responds to these stances differently. Allowing keeps arousal low. Monitoring raises it slightly. That slight rise is often enough to prevent the system from completing its final adjustments. And those final adjustments matter, because this is where choice returns quietly. Not conscious choice, physiological choice. The system is deciding how quickly to rise, how sharp to make awareness, how much of the day to allow in at once. This decision is not binary. It is graded, and it is influenced by interference. If awareness remains soft and uninvested, the system continues gently. If awareness sharpens, the system accelerates. This is why some mornings feel rushed, even without an alarm. The system was nudged too early. It responded by moving upward faster than ideal. The result is waking that feels abrupt, even if nothing external caused it. At this stage, the nervous system is highly plastic. Small inputs have large effects. A shift in thought, a change in breathing, a tightening of muscle tone. These are interpreted as signals. Signals are responded to. This is not conscious. It is automatic. The system has one priority now. Ensure that when waking occurs, it is coherent. If it senses that coherence is threatened by premature alertness or fragmented awareness, it will accelerate to regain control. Control is safer than limbo, so the system errs on the side of waking. This is why trying to stay asleep rarely works here. Trying is a form of effort. Effort increases arousal. Arousal pulls awareness upward. The more you try, the more you interfere. The paradox returns again. The only way through this stage is to stop caring whether you pass through it. Indifference is not disengagement. It is trust. Trust that the system knows what it is doing. Trust that you do not need to supervise the transition. Trust that nothing will be lost if you do not pay attention. This trust is difficult for modern minds. We are trained to manage everything, even rest, especially rest. But rest does not respond to management. It responds to permission. Here, permission must extend to uncertainty. You must allow yourself to not know whether you are asleep or awake. That ambiguity is the gateway. If you insist on clarity, the system gives it to you by waking you. Clarity is expensive. It ends the process. Ambiguity is efficient. It allows the process to complete. This is also why this stage often feels unproductive. There is no insight, no imagery, no depth, just a vague sense of being almost somewhere. That vagueness is intentional. It keeps awareness from anchoring. Anchoring would stabilize consciousness prematurely. Premature stabilization forces waking. The system wants stabilization to occur after the transition, not during it. So it maintains instability here, not chaotic instability. Gentle ambiguity. You might feel as though your thoughts start and stop without direction. That is correct. Direction is suspended. You might feel as though time is strange again, not dissolved, inconsequential. That too is correct. Time does not matter here. Sequence does not matter. Only smoothness matters. This is the final smoothing layer, the buffer between sleep and waking. If this buffer is rushed, waking feels jagged. If this buffer is honored, waking feels natural. Another subtle phenomenon appears here. The sense of effort begins to return faintly. Not physical effort, cognitive effort. The effort to think. Earlier, thinking was impossible or uninteresting. Here, thinking is possible, but still unappealing. This is the mind's way of testing readiness. It asks, if we needed to think, could we? If thinking arises without resistance, the system notes readiness, but it does not yet commit. It waits. This waiting can feel uncomfortable for minds accustomed to action. There is nothing to do, nothing to finish, nothing to conclude, no clear direction. Just hovering again but lighter than before. This hovering is different from the early night. Earlier, hovering was deep and receptive. This hovering is shallow and provisional. It exists to ensure continuity. If you pass through it without interference, the system transitions smoothly. If you interfere, the system compensates by waking you. Compensation is not punishment. It is correction. The nervous system prioritizes coherence over comfort. If it senses incoherence, it corrects aggressively. Here, coherence means a clean boundary between sleep and waking. This boundary must be crossed decisively, but only after preparation is complete. This stage is the final preparation. It is quiet because it must be. It is subtle because it must not trigger alertness. It is fragile because small disturbances have large effects. That fragility is why patience matters here. Not active patience. Passive patience. Letting time pass without marking it. Letting awareness drift without following it. Letting sensations arise without interpreting them. This non-interference allows the system to finish what it started. And what it started was not sleep. It was restoration. Restoration is complete now. What remains is reintegration. Reintegration requires timing. Too early, and the system resists. Too late, and inertia sets in. The system finds the timing itself. Your involvement is unnecessary. At this stage, the best possible action is inaction, not forced inaction, natural inaction. If you find yourself awake here, do not try to fall asleep. Do not try to stay awake. Do not try to understand. Just exist. Existing without agenda is the signal the system needs. It says, there is no threat, there is no demand. Proceed as planned. And the system does. Gradually, without sensation, without marker. This is why people often cannot say when they actually woke up, because the transition did not feel like an event. It felt like continuation. That continuation begins here, long before eyes open, long before thought returns. The system is aligning its final parameters: sensitivity, responsiveness, orientation. Everything is being set to minimum effective levels. Nothing extra, nothing missing, just enough. As this stage completes, something subtle shifts. Not yet, but soon. The sense of ambiguity begins to resolve, not into clarity, into direction, not into thinking, into readiness. That readiness is not energetic. It is neutral, like a door unlocked, but not yet opened. The system has prepared the opening. It will choose when to walk through, and when it does, the movement will feel inevitable, smooth, unforced, as if it had been underway all along. There is a moment when readiness stops being potential and becomes direction, not intention, not decision, direction. Nothing has happened yet, and yet the system has already turned. Up to now, everything has been preparation, softening, stabilizing, loosening, allowing. Now, the balance begins to tilt almost imperceptibly toward emergence. Not because something external demands it, but because the internal cycle has reached completion. The night has done what it needed to do. And when a system finishes its work, it does not linger. It transitions. This transition does not feel like effort. It feels like inevitability. Earlier, ambiguity was necessary. Ambiguity prevented premature anchoring. Now, ambiguity begins to resolve not into clarity, but into orientation. Orientation answers a simple question without words. Which way is forward now? That answer does not arrive as thought. It arrives as alignment. Breathing changes first, not noticeably, just enough. Inhalations become slightly more responsive. Exhalations slightly less dominant. This shift is subtle, but decisive. It signals the nervous system that engagement is approaching. Not yet, but soon. Muscle tone follows, not contraction. Readiness. The body does not tense. It organizes. Weight redistributes. Contact points with the surface beneath you become more defined. You may not feel this consciously, but the body is reestablishing its map. Earlier, boundaries dissolved to allow rest. Now, boundaries return to allow action. This return is careful. Abrupt boundary formation would shock the system. So it happens gradually. The sense of having a body becomes clearer but still distant. You are not moving. You are not preparing to move. But the body is no longer absent. It is quietly present. At this stage, awareness may feel slightly brighter, not sharp, coherent. There is still no narrative, no internal voice describing what is happening. But there is a sense that something is coming, not anticipation. Readiness. Anticipation is charged. Readiness is neutral. This neutrality is important. It prevents the emotional system from activating too early. Emotions will return later, in context. Here, the system keeps emotional gain low. Too much emotion would distort orientation. The brain wants clarity of direction, not intensity. Another shift occurs in sensory filtering. Earlier, external input was heavily dampened. Now, the dampening eases slightly. Sounds may register faintly, not as events, but as presence. Light behind closed eyes may be acknowledged, not interpreted. These inputs do not pull attention outward yet. They are simply noted. The brain is rebuilding its map of the environment. Not to respond, to re-enter. This re-entry must be smooth. The system checks consistency. Is the environment stable? Are conditions safe enough to emerge? If the answer remains yes, the process continues. If not, the system can pause. It can drift back into deeper sleep briefly. This flexibility is crucial. It prevents forced waking. That is why some mornings involve brief returns to sleep, not regression adjustment. The system ensures optimal timing. Timing matters. Emergence too early creates grogginess. Emergence too late creates inertia. The system aims for the middle path. This is why natural waking often feels precise, as if it happened at the right moment. Because it did. At this stage, thought becomes possible again. Not compelling possible. A fragment may appear. Not content-heavy. Something like a word without context, or an image without meaning. These fragments do not develop. They are tests. The brain checking whether cognitive systems can re-engage smoothly. If they do without resistance, readiness increases. If they cause arousal, the system slows. Again, you are not meant to manage this. The system reads your responses automatically. Tension signals delay. Ease signals continuation. This is also where breathing becomes more variable. Not erratic, flexible. The breath responds to micro changes. A slightly deeper inhale, a slightly shorter exhale. This variability indicates readiness for interaction. During deep sleep, variability is low. During waking, it increases. Here, it begins to rise gently. Heart rate follows, not accelerating responsive. The system is moving from maintenance mode to interaction mode, but it is not there yet. Interaction requires orientation. Orientation requires coherence. Coherence is still being assembled. Another subtle change occurs in attention. Earlier, attention was diffuse. Now, it begins to coalesce. Not into focus, into availability. You could focus if needed, but nothing demands it yet. This availability is what makes waking feel possible. But possibility is not action. The system is still pacing itself. It is still protecting against abrupt shifts. This is why alarms feel so intrusive. They force action before availability has matured. The system reacts defensively. Cortisol spikes. Baseline jumps. Baseline jumps. Baseline jumps. The day begins with friction. Here, without interruption, the system controls its own pacing. This is ideal. At this stage, if you become fully aware, you may feel a gentle pull upward. Not urgency. Momentum. Momentum without push. This momentum is difficult to describe because it lacks force. It is like rolling very slowly on level ground. There is movement, but no effort. This is the hallmark of natural transition. Effortless change. You are not being pulled out of sleep. Sleep is receding. That distinction matters. Being pulled implies resistance. Receding implies completion. Sleep is not losing a battle. It is stepping aside. The body and brain have finished what sleep was needed for. So sleep yields. Yielding feels calm. This is why good waking does not feel like interruption. It feels like continuation. At this stage, identity begins to reassemble. Not as story, as function. You are not thinking about who you are, but you are becoming capable of being who you are again. Roles are not activated, but the infrastructure for roles is returning. Language centers become more available. Motor planning becomes possible. Spatial orientation sharpens. All of this happens quietly, without conscious awareness. The mind does not announce, "You are waking now." That would be disruptive. Instead, the system lets waking happen the way sleep happened, gradually, naturally. without commentary. This is why the precise moment of waking is often unclear. You might realize you are awake only after you already are, because the transition did not feel like a switch. It felt like arrival. Arrival does not need to be marked. You know you are there when you are there. This chapter of the night is short. It does not linger. Once direction is set, the system does not hesitate. Hesitation would waste energy. The final adjustments are made quickly, but smoothly. No abrupt jumps, no sudden demands, just a steady rise in engagement. As this rise continues, the sense of neutrality begins to shift, not into emotion, into tone. A baseline tone for the day begins to form. This tone is not mood. Mood will come later. Tone is readiness. How open you feel. How reactive you are likely to be. How much resistance you carry into the day. This tone is shaped by everything that came before. By how deeply rest occurred. By how smoothly transitions unfolded. This is where that work becomes consequential. The day you will have has already been influenced before you open your eyes. Not determined influenced. This influence is gentle but persistent. It does not force outcomes. It shapes responses, and responses shape everything else. As this stage completes, the system is no longer preparing. It is executing, not consciously, automatically. The door that was unlocked earlier begins to open, not wide, just enough. Awareness moves forward. The world moves closer, but nothing is rushed. Nothing is abrupt. The night releases you the way it held you, without demand, without force. And as this release continues, the final layer of sleep loosens. The last resistance fades, and the system moves steadily, quietly, toward the surface where light, time, and identity will reappear, not as intrusions, but as the next phase of the same continuous flow. Before the eyes open, there is a brief interval where nothing has been named yet, and everything is already in motion. This interval is not sleep. It is not waking. It is the thinning of the last veil. Up to now, the system has been preparing quietly, adjusting parameters, aligning rhythms, opening channels just enough to allow passage. Now, passage is inevitable. But inevitability does not arrive with force. It arrives with coherence. You do not wake up all at once. You assemble. The first thing to return is not thought. It is orientation. A vague sense of here. Not where you are, just that you are somewhere. Space exists again, but without coordinates. There is no up or down yet. No room. No memory of position. Just spatial presence. This presence is subtle, but it anchors everything that follows. Without it, waking would feel like falling. With it, waking feels like rising into place. Breathing changes again, not because you control it, but because the body anticipates interaction. The breath becomes slightly more structured, not shallow, not deep, purposeful. Purpose without aim. Muscle tone continues its return, still low, but no longer absent. The body is not ready to move. It is ready to hold shape. This is important. Movement comes later. First, the body must remember how to exist as a form. Earlier, form dissolved to allow rest. Now, form returns to allow engagement. The return is gentle. The body does not snap back into readiness. It reclaims itself slowly. This reclaiming is often felt as weight, not heaviness. Definition: you begin to feel that you are lying on something, not in pain, not in discomfort, just contact. Contact establishes boundary. Boundary establishes self. This is where the sense of I begins to reappear, not as narrative, as containment. You are no longer diffused. You are contained again. This containment does not feel restrictive. It feels reassuring. The mind now has a place to return to. Earlier, awareness floated without anchor. Now, it has one. This anchoring is what allows thought to return later without destabilizing the system. Thought needs a container. Without it, thought fragments. With it, thought organizes. The system is building that container now, quietly, without inviting thought in yet. At this stage, sounds may begin to separate from silence. Not loud, just distinct. A distant hum, a faint rustle. You do not interpret them. You do not locate them. They exist as events rather than noise. This distinction matters. Noise overwhelms. Events orient. The brain is shifting sensory processing from background to foreground gradually. Light may begin to press against closed eyes. Not brightness, presence. The brain registers that light exists. Not what kind, not where it comes from, just that it is there. This is another cue. The external world is still present, still stable, still safe. The system continues. At this point, memory has not returned. You do not remember who you are. You do not remember what day it is. You do not remember what awaits you. And this is intentional. Memory returns last, because memory carries obligation. Obligation raises arousal. Arousal too early would fracture the transition. So memory is held back. The system ensures that embodiment and orientation are stable first. Only then does it allow memory to re-enter. This sequencing is critical. If memory returns too early, waking feels anxious. If embodiment returns too late, waking feels dissociative. Here, the system balances both. That balance feels smooth, unremarkable. So unremarkable that you may not notice it at all. But its absence is immediately felt when it does not occur. This is why some awakenings feel disjointed. The sequence was disrupted. Here, it is intact. As orientation strengthens, attention begins to sharpen slightly, not into focus, into selectivity. You could attend to something if needed, but nothing demands attention yet. This selectivity is readiness. It differs from focus. Focus is engagement. Selectivity is capability. The system is capable of engagement, but not committed to it. This distinction allows for choice. Choice will matter soon, but not yet. At this stage, there may be a fleeting sense of anticipation, not excitement, not dread, just the knowledge that the night is ending. This knowledge is not verbal. It is rhythmic. The body knows its cycles. The brain knows its timing. Together, they sense completion. This sensing does not hurry. Completion does not require urgency. It requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement happens silently. You may notice that thoughts now begin to form more easily, but they are incomplete. Half phrases, unfinished images. They do not pull you. They test the waters. The system allows them briefly, then lets them fade. This back and forth continues for a short time, allowing just enough cognitive activity to ensure readiness, not enough to overwhelm. This is the final calibration. The system checks. Can thought exist without raising arousal too high? Can sensation exist without demanding response? Can identity begin to form without pulling the day in prematurely? When the answers are yes, the system proceeds. This proceeding does not feel like a step. It feels like a flow increasing. Awareness becomes more continuous, not fragmented, not thin, just present. The sense of being someone begins to return. Not who you are, that comes later, but that you are someone. A center, a perspective. This center does not yet have content. It is empty but stable. This stability is crucial. It prevents immediate overwhelm. It gives you a place to stand before the day arrives. As this center stabilizes, memory starts to seep in. Not all at once, not with detail. A sense of familiarity. You know this body. You know this space. You know that there is a life associated with this awareness. Details remain distant. This distance is protective. It prevents sudden emotional loading. The system wants memory to return gradually. This is why sometimes you wake feeling calm until a thought appears. That thought brings the day in. But here, the system delays that moment. It gives you a buffer, a few seconds, sometimes longer. This buffer is precious. It is the last gift of the night. A moment where you exist without obligation, without role, without history, just presence, contained, and ready. If this buffer is interrupted by alarms, noise, sudden movement, waking feels harsh. If it is allowed, waking feels gentle. The difference is not in what happens after. It is in how this moment is handled. As the buffer holds, the system finalizes the transition. Hormonal signals shift again. Cortisol begins to rise, not spike, just enough to support alertness. Temperature begins to increase slightly. Blood flow redistributes. All of this happens without your awareness, because awareness is still stabilizing. When awareness stabilizes fully, these changes will already be in place. You will feel capable, not rushed. This is the aim. At the very end of this interval, something simple happens. The eyes want to open, not because you decide to, because the system is ready. The urge is gentle, not demanding. You could resist it briefly. You could linger. The system would allow it. But the direction is set. Emergence is underway. This is the final threshold. Beyond it, the day begins. But this threshold itself is neither night nor day. It is the seam, the place where one state hands you to the next. And like all good handoffs, it is quiet. No announcement, no ceremony, just continuity. As this continuity completes, as the center of awareness firms without strain, as memory stands just outside the door, waiting to be let in, the last remnants of sleep release their hold, and the system prepares calmly, confidently, to let you step forward into whatever comes next. There is no exact moment when night ends. That belief belongs to clocks. What actually happens is quieter. The night does not stop. It thins, and you do not leave it. You pass through it. By the time awareness feels steady enough to hold a thought, most of the transition has already happened. Your body is oriented. Your breath has adapted. Your nervous system has chosen a baseline for the day. You arrive late to your own awakening, and that is by design. If you were present for every step, it would feel overwhelming. So the system lets you in only after the structure is stable. Now, awareness feels continuous, not sharp whole. You are here, not questioning it, not proving it, just here. The sense of self has returned, not fully clothed in story, but no longer empty. You know you exist. You know this body is yours. You know there is a day on the other side of this moment. But that day has not rushed in yet. It waits. The world feels present, but not loud. Sounds have shape, but not demand. Light has presence, but not insistence. You could open your eyes, but nothing forces you to. This is the final residue of night, a moment where choice exists without pressure. Choice without urgency is rare. Most of the day, choice comes wrapped in consequence. Here, choice is simply availability. You may notice that your thoughts now begin to form fully, but slowly. They do not collide. They do not spiral. They rise, one at a time. This is the mark of successful transition. Cognitive systems are online, but not overloaded. The mind has space. That space is what the night has been building toward all along. Not insight, not answers. Space. Space between thoughts. Space between reactions. Space between stimulus and response. This space is fragile. It will narrow as the day progresses. But its presence now matters because it sets the tone. Tone is not mood. Tone is how tightly life will grip you today. If this space exists, life grips gently. If it does not, life grips hard. Nothing you consciously think right now will matter as much as this space. This space determines how quickly stress accumulates, how sharply irritation arises, how easily you recover from small disruptions. It is the invisible gift of the night. You do not notice it when it is present. You notice its absence when it is gone. This is why rushing mornings feel wrong, even when nothing bad happens. The space was never allowed to form. The night was cut short. The handoff was interrupted. Here, the handoff is complete. Nothing dramatic marked it. But something fundamental has occurred. You are no longer inside the night. The night is now inside you. Its work persists as tone, as pacing, as capacity. You carry it forward without knowing how. This is why the best nights do not announce themselves as good sleep. They simply leave you more able to pause, more able to listen, more able to not react immediately. That ability did not come from effort. It came from surrender, from allowing each phase to complete without interference, from not demanding meaning, from not chasing rest, from letting the system do what it has always known how to do. As awareness fully stabilizes, memory begins to return in layers, not all at once. First, the sense of continuity. There is a life here. Then, fragments of identity. This is who I tend to be. Only later do details arrive. Tasks, concerns, names, obligations. This staggered return is intentional. It prevents overload. It ensures that you step into the day rather than fall into it. If you pause here just briefly, you may notice something subtle. A softness behind the eyes, a steadiness in the chest, a lack of urgency in the breath. This is the residue of the night's work. It will fade as the day unfolds, but it does not vanish completely. It influences how you meet the first challenge, how you respond to the first irritation, how you recover from the first mistake. These small moments compound. The day becomes easier not because it is different, but because you are. This is the quiet power of the space between sleeps. Not the space you remember, the space you pass through without noticing, the space that does not speak in thoughts or images, the space that recalibrates you while you are not watching. Every night, you pass through it. Sometimes briefly, sometimes deeply. When it is interrupted, you feel the difference without knowing why. When it is allowed, life feels more navigable. Not perfect, just lighter. This entire cycle from descent to emergence is not something you need to master. It cannot be optimized. It cannot be forced. It only responds to permission. Permission to not understand. Permission to not intervene. Permission to let go of control. The night does not ask you to do anything. It only asks you to stay out of the way. And when you do, it carries you, not toward answers, toward balance, toward readiness, toward the subtle adjustment that makes tomorrow feel possible. Even now, as awareness settles fully into the present moment, as the last threads of night dissolve without drama, the effects remain. In the spaces between your thoughts, in the pauses before your reactions, in the quiet capacity to begin the day without having to brace yourself for it.